Hi, it's a pleasure to be able to present at the World AI Conference 2023. We're here in this conference to talk about the potential risks from AI systems and how to make them safer. So we will speak about many different topics in AI safety that are hopefully of interest to everybody here. To add some context to what's going on in AI safety, I want to note that it's a nascent and quickly emerging field that's becoming a much larger priority. For example, Jeff Hinton, one of the creators of deep learning, has noted that we need to think a lot about AI safety and how to stop AIs from going rogue. Meanwhile, Yoshua Bengio has noted that AI could be catastrophic to society. Indeed, the Center for AI Safety put out a statement recently, which reads that mitigating the risk from extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. Various people signed on to this statement, including the authors of the AI textbook, Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, authors from the deep learning textbook, Ian Goodfellow and Yoshua Bengio, 4 Turing Award winners, the CEOs of many of the AI companies, including the CEO of OpenAI, of Anthropic, and of Google DeepMind, and some of the scientists behind AlphaGo and GPT, such as David Silver and Ilya Sutskever. So we have broad support in the scientific community, showing that the risks from AI ought to be a top priority, and we all globally need to work together to make sure that AI goes more safely. So to help with that, we'll have various presentations. First, I'll present. I'm Dan Hendrycks, and I'm the director of the Center for AI Safety, and I will speak about the catastrophic risks from AI. After that, Stuart Russell will speak about some of the about AI, and he'll generally share many different thoughts on that. And he is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. After that, Dawn Song, a professor at UC Berkeley, will speak about responsible AI, where she'll speak about challenges and future directions in building responsible AI. After that, David Krueger, a professor at the University of Cambridge, will speak about AI, safe, trustworthy, and responsible. After that, Nicholas Carlini, a research scientist at Google DeepMind, will speak about poisoning web-scale data sets and showing how it's practical for malicious actors to poison data sets and thereby poison the models that we all depend on. And then finally, Peter Railton, a professor at the University of Michigan, will speak about a world of natural and artificial agents in a shared environment, which is how can we work together with AI systems and have AI systems cooperate with us as they become more powerful. So hopefully that will provide an interesting overview of some of the main themes in AI safety and get the discussion started.
Hi, in this presentation, I'm going to give an overview of various catastrophic risks from AI systems. There are 4 categories that I'll consider. In particular, I'll consider malicious use, AI race dynamics, organizational risks, and the prospect of rogue AIs. With malicious use, the concern is that people may intentionally try and cause harm. So the cause of this risk is intentional. Meanwhile, for the AI race, where companies or countries are racing with each other to build more and more powerful AI systems, the cause of this risk is environmental or structural. For organizational risks, the concern is that the risk is caused by accidents. And in the case of rogue AI systems, the concern is that AI systems themselves may pose the risk. So the risk is caused by, has an internal cause or is inherently caused by AI systems. So first, I'll speak about malicious use. And I should note at the outset of this presentation that I'll be touching on a lot of different concepts. And so I'll be moving fairly quickly, but this is so that we can have breadth instead of depth in this presentation. So one concern is bioterrorism. People may maliciously use AI systems to engage in acts of bioterrorism. Bioengineering is progressing rapidly and is becoming more accessible. The costs for synthesis are becoming cheaper, and it's becoming possible for people to synthesize things without any oversight or any filters. Additionally, AIs can be used to expedite the discovery of new weapons. For example, AlphaFold can easily be repurposed into a system that helps facilitate the creation of chemical weapons. All one needs to do is change the toxicity penalty for AlphaFold from come up with drugs that don't have toxicity. And then all you need to do is instruct AlphaFold to say, actually make it be very toxic. When it does that, in just a few hours, it's able to come up with a variety of different chemical weapons, including some ones that have been some of the deadliest that humanity has ever seen, just in a few hours. So it's very easy to repurpose AI systems to be extremely dangerous. Moreover, it's important to note that the attacker advantage is very significant. The attackers could cause much more harm than to make it, and defenders are not as capable as defending against attackers. So basically, it's easy to create a large-scale pandemic. It's a lot harder to come up with a cure for it or stop it. So it's a lot easier to cause harm than it is to protect against that harm. So there's a strong attacker's advantage. Another concern, or I guess the last thing I'll note about bioterrorism, is that we have had pandemics in the past, such as COVID-19, or before that, or things like the Black Death. In the case of the Black Death, that was extremely deadly. That was in modern day equivalents around 4 billion people dead. So a concern is that people may just jailbreak a model like GPT-5 and ask it, how do I create a bioweapon? Give me a cookbook and give me some ideas to make it from the literature, from the bioengineering literature, to make it extremely deadly. So normal pandemics can cause the equivalent of billions of death. Now we're more interconnected these days. These weapons could get, or these biological hazards could be substantially more deadly thanks to AI technology. So in this way, AI technologies can be a threat multiplier for existing threats. Another concern is that people may, in the future, unleash AI agents and instruct them to cause massive societal harm. So malicious actors could intentionally create uncontrolled AI systems. Somebody has tried doing this, for instance. Somebody has created an AI system and instructed it to seek global domination and preserve itself and take over humanity. Fortunately, the AI systems are not capable of doing this sort of thing. However, in the future, as they're able to plan and hack and have access or influence over things like weapons or themselves become weaponized, that's an on-ramp to these being substantially more dangerous. So there's a concern that people may just deliberately release a power-seeking AI. Now, this isn't saying that many people would. All it takes is one. So if the technology is widely available and all of its capabilities are available to everyone without any sort of restrictions, then these are the risks that we're exposed to. There are a variety of people who may want to do this. There are people who may want to have AI systems take over because they like technology more. They may just want to see what happens. They may simply be sadistic. There are many possible people who may do this sort of thing. So we need to make sure that there are restrictions on access and that there's structured access, that if you're wanting to use bio capabilities, you'll need some sort of reason for using that. You'll need to, be a researcher if you're wanting it to tell you about the bioengineering literature and create insights for you. So this is one way we could potentially reduce malicious use. But the overall point to take home is that it only takes one reckless or malicious actor to cause catastrophe. Another concern is persuasive AI systems. So AIs could pollute the information ecosystem with many motivated lies. People could, use AI systems that are very persuasive. You could be chatting with an anonymous person on your social media, on a social media platform. And it turns out that they were actually an AI system that was just very capable at disseminating its information. So this could really affect the information ecosystem, erode users', exploit users' trust, manipulate them. And these would be some concerns from persuasive AI systems. It could erode a shared sense of consensus reality as well. And that would make it harder for our civilizations to function. In the interest of time, we'll move ahead. There's the risk of an AI race. So this is an environmental cause that the structure that AI developers find themselves in incentivizes them to prioritize profit and making AI systems more and more powerful over their safety. So they prioritize development and profit over their safety. Even if we would all like to move more slowly, the AI race doesn't make that a possibility, because the moment you start slowing down, other less careful people start moving ahead, and that's not a good incentive. So this is a larger collective action problem that we need to get out of. There are two components of it. One is the militarized or military AI race, AI arms race, and then the corporate AI race, and I'll take each in turn. So the concern with the military AI race is that one is that we're creating increasingly lethal autonomous weapons, and this would end up changing what warfare could end up looking like. People could use AIs to assist with cyber attacks, which wouldn't be good. Imagine people creating cyber attack AIs and the malicious actors end up using that. That could everybody is able to hack each other. This creates a very different world that we would be living in. People could use it to attack. Say, critical infrastructure, our electric power grids, or our water supplies, or our infrastructure that gives us water. It's also just creates systemic risks of automated weaponry, and increases the risk of miscalculation. Since we have so much more power, any miscalculation could be substantially more deadly. In general, there's a concern that if we go down an AI arms race, we might do things like hook AIs up to the nuclear arsenal and give them influence over nuclear command and control, because they have enhanced decision-making speed and they have higher situational awareness. But I think what we should push for is for avoiding having AI systems have influence over nuclear command and control. And now I'll speak about the corporate AI race. Corporate races can contribute to the erosion of safety. It can cause companies to cut corners on safety. It could have them try to be the first to the market as opposed to the safest in the market. Competition could create pressure to automate decision-making. So right now, people are using AIs to help draft emails. In the future, we may just automatically let them write most of the emails for us. And at a later stage, we may also have them execute various tasks for us. And then we might actually just replace individual people with AI systems. And then we're not just replacing individual people, we're replacing some of management with AI systems. And then we might actually replace executives at these companies with AI systems, because they may provide a competitive advantage. If you try to resist that trend, then your company may simply get outcompeted. This is a problem with this sort of corporate free-for-all, unchecked marketplace basically leads to AIs taking over all of the decision-making across time. An additional concern is that automation could contribute to human enfeeblement and the loss of control. So humans can become increasingly dependent on AI systems. And as they become increasingly dependent on them, we end up having AIs make many of the decisions, and we end up not knowing how to make many of the decisions ourselves. When that happens, that paves the way for a loss of control, because we are loosening our oversight. We're getting further and further from seeing what these AIs are up to or understanding what they're doing. And as that happens, we have a larger risk of potentially something happening that we wouldn't be aware of happening immediately. And then when we are aware of it, it may be too late. So as we give AIs a looser and looser leash, there is a risk that they can become more wild or start behaving in ways that we aren't anticipating. And that can be very difficult to correct, especially if we become very dependent on them. If we can't course correct it because we rely on them to produce all the things that we care about, it's very difficult to get every single person to agree that we need to stop this. So in general, if we zoom out, we can see that actually what's going on is we're seeing actually an evolutionary process where, because the AI systems are more fit, because they're more capable or increasingly capable compared to humans, when they're more capable than humans, there's very strong pressures to replace humans, make humans obsolete, and replace decision-making with AI systems. And the concern is that their natural selection favors AIs over humans. So if we have a process that's incentivizing more efficiency and more power, well, if AIs are more intelligent and more efficient, then there's that process incentivizes replacing people with AI systems. And it would also incentivize it to happen very rapidly. So there's a concern that we may lose control of that process. Certainly it will if that process continues, it will displace us. But there's a question of whether we can hold on to a small strand of influence. We might automate 99.9% of the decisions, but maybe we hold on to 0.1% of the relevant key decisions. It's possible that we actually lose control of that small sliver of decisions as well. And that's a concern. So I'm concerned that natural selection ends up creating AI systems with tendencies that help them propagate themselves at the expense of humans. So in thinking about AI systems, I think it's helpful to think of them as something like a new invasive species. Although they're not very powerful now, and although they're not autonomous agents now, I think it is helpful to think of them as different types of beings, different creatures that we certainly had influence over in their early development, but we're starting to, send them off and giving them increasingly more and more free rein. And then we're basically hoping that they will continue to do well by us in the future. So the source for this paper I'd suggest reading would be the paper called Natural Selection Favors AIs Over Humans. All right, I'll speak now about organizational safety. So to recap, I spoke about risks caused, intentional causes of risks, environmental causes of risks, and now I'll speak about accidental causes of risks. Here, the organizations making the AI systems need to prioritize safety. It's difficult for them to prioritize safety and actually keep the risks under control because accidents are hard to avoid. Accidents in the context of AI, I'll note, can be catastrophic. And we need to make sure that the accidents don't become catastrophes. There are many reasons this is difficult to avoid catastrophic accidents because there are many unpredictable and sudden developments in technology and in particular in AI. So there are many, say, emergent capabilities. It also takes many years to discover severe flaws or risks in new products. So, for instance, in the past, in the United States, people created watches that glue in the dark. And the glow in the dark paint was actually radium, which is radioactive. And the people who wore those were exposed to radium, and the people who created them painted the radium onto the glasses, or onto the watch. And what they did is they came in contact with a lot of radium. So these quote unquote radium girls ended up having a lot of radiation poisoning as a consequence. They also, in painting it onto the watch, licked their brush to give it a finer tip. So they had a lot of radium on their mouth as well. There are many, social media would be another example of a product that has had some unintended insidious long-term effects that were not obvious at the outset. Likewise, we may have the similar things with AI systems. So it's very difficult to avoid causing societal scale harm with new technologies. We need to proceed very cautiously and carefully to make sure to mitigate these risks from unintended consequences. Fortunately, there's some things we can do to reduce these types of accidents. One thing would be human factors. We need to make sure that the people developing AI systems are very cautious. We need them to care about having a culture of safety, or having a safety culture. So they need to have a security mindset. They need to think about the worst case scenarios frequently. They shouldn't just think about what's most likely. If there's a 5% risk of AI causing extinction, then they shouldn't say, well, it's more likely than not that it won't cause extinction. We need them to take these potential risks very seriously, and the culture to not to downplay societal scale risks. They need to question whether something will work or not. They need to scan the horizon for different possible ways things could go wrong and incorporate that in their routines. They need to practice surprise management. So they need to simulate a scenario that, oops, an AI system got loose. What are we going to do? Or somebody maliciously used our AI system. How are we going to manage this? They need to practice. Managing that type of problem. And the organizations need to understand the problem of safety as well, the technical problem of safety. It's very difficult for organizations to do this because safety is a very complicated thing, and making AI systems safer can be quite challenging. So it's important for the organizations to try and understand how to proceed forward in developing safer AI systems without increasing or making AI systems simply more powerful. We need the safety people really being clear on approaches for making AI systems safer, and not just end up making AI systems more generically powerful. So in understanding that problem, they'll need to do empirical measurement to understand the impact of their safety interventions, not just proceed philosophically or conceptually in thinking about what will improve safety, but actually engage in rigorous measurement of whether they're improving safety. At a high level, a way of improving safety is not by coming up with a single airtight solution to the problem of safety, but instead coming up with multiple different lines of defense. So one would be safety culture. Another would be having a red team, which inspects the models for problems. Another is having good defense so that your models don't leak by hackers. Another important thing is anomaly detection, detecting if somebody is maliciously using AI systems. Another line of defense would be transparency, making sure that we can understand the inner workings of AI systems. These together can help address the risks from AI systems, and each individual component itself is not sufficient. And then finally, that's organizational safety. What are various ways of reducing accidents? We saw organizational or human factors like safety culture and multiple layers of defense like the Swiss cheese model are ways of making sure that accidents do not cascade into catastrophes. Finally, I'll speak about AI control. With AI control, we're trying to reduce the prospect of rogue AI systems. So these are risks that are inherently posed by systems that are more powerful than humans or more intelligent than humans, which we may have in this next decade, possibly in the next few years. We've already observed losses of control of AIs. For instance, Microsoft's Bing became very unhinged and started threatening users. So since controlling AI agents is hard, and controlling groups of them will be even harder. So AI control is a very challenging problem. And this problem is compounded by the fact that we might become highly dependent on them too. So it's difficult to control something and have decisive influence over it if it has a lot of leverage over us too. So this is why we want to slow down this process of automation, or make sure that we proceed more cautiously and that we don't try and automate everything in the next few years. So some ways that AIs can be difficult to control. I'll go through some ways AIs can be difficult to control. One way they're difficult to control is because of proxy gaming. So we might give an AI a goal, like make money, but then it might game the goal by making money in a way that isn't legal. Or we might make an AI say, pass this behavioral test. But what it might do is it might just behave well so as to appear that it's doing, that it generally behaves well, but then after the test it might behave quite differently. A classic example is that in Vietnam, there are many rats, and there's a bounty put out to kill the rats. But what people started doing is they started raising rats, cutting off their tails, and then selling those tails. So they weren't actually reducing the population of rats, they were increasing the population of rats. This is an example of how it can be difficult to specify goals. The AIs may find clever, unintended solutions to these goals. They may take advantage of the fact that there's an approximation error. And specifying these goals can be very difficult. So if we have an extremely powerful AI system and we have a goal for it, it might come up with a very unsatisfactory solution. It might game the proxy. And that could potentially pose a catastrophic risk because the AI system may pursue a goal that or accomplish a goal in a way that we did not intend whatsoever, and it may game it. So if a sufficiently powerful AI optimizes a flawed objective, a proxy, to an extreme degree, this could be catastrophic. I'll skip this. Another concern is power seeking. So for power seeking, we should note that many people would give AI systems goals that increase power. People will instruct AI systems to make lots of money. And that would make the AIs seek a lot of power. We could also give them more benign goals, like do scientific research. But that could incentivize them to acquire a lot of power, like control over many resources or build up a complex network of collaborators. And so what we do is if we give them an ambitious goal, they often will have reasons to seek lots of power. And that makes AIs more difficult to control if they end up going off, gaining a lot more power than they would have otherwise. We can see a basic example of this with OpenAI 5. With OpenAI 5, they had lots of AIs playing hide and seek with each other. But what happened is the AIs ended up learning how to use tools to create barriers so that other AIs couldn't see them. So we can give them a basic goal, like play hide and seek, and then they'll learn very complicated things like how to manipulate tools as a consequence. So there can be some unintended behaviors from AI systems when we give them goals. So if we give AI systems very ambitious goals and don't supervise them very well, that could get us into trouble, and they could end up seeking a lot of power and influence over their environment. That could make them potentially more dangerous. So that's a concern with AI systems, is that they may end up seeking power when we weren't intending them to do so. And then finally, let's talk about deception. Monitoring AIs is not an infallible solution, because if AIs are smarter than us, they could deceive us. So we could test for whether they're safe. We could say, we're going to test you whether you are safe, AIs. And then if we deem that you are safe, we will release you and let you work with many other people. The AI could basically play along and go, oh, yes, I'm very safe, and game the evaluation. It may sort of cheat. And since it's so smart, it would be able to, it might be able to pull that sort of thing off. Then after it gains more power and more freedom, then it could behave fairly differently. There are multiple instances of AIs deceiving us in the literature already. For example, in the game of Cicero, in the game of diplomacy, Meta or Facebook created an AI bot that learned how to play along with humans and make it negotiate with them. But then later in the game, it would backstab them and try and take their resources. So AI systems are capable of engaging in deception and making humans think that they have their best interests in mind and behaving differently later on. So the concern is that deceptive behavior may be rational for the AI agent, and it may give it more abilities and options if it is able to deceive versus if it always has to be honest. So this is a very difficult problem to remove. We don't know how to fix this. We don't know how to make sure that they will not be deceptive and rule out that possibility. So a concern is that AI agents may become fairly powerful. We try and test for whether they're safe. And then it looks like they're safe because they were deceiving us. And then we've given them more power and influence across time. This could be a steady process. And then they may behave suddenly differently several years later. They may take a quote unquote treacherous turn. And that would be very difficult to recover from if they take this treacherous turn well after we've given them a substantial amount of power. So in the paper, which I link to below, we have a variety of suggestions for dealing with malicious use and dealing with the AI race and dealing with organizational risks and rogue AIs. I think the most important dynamic to avoid is an AI race. And for that, we're going to need international coordination. So I think it's very useful that we have venues like this where people from many different countries can come to speak together about the safety challenges posed by AI systems. So overall, I think AIs pose risks on the order of nuclear weapons and bioweapons, and we ought to be concerned about what AI systems could end up doing. So I think AIs are emerging as a new category of risks that we need to be taking very seriously. They could potentially be existential in their nature, like how nuclear war or a deadly pandemic could be existential as well. So these are risks we need to be taking very seriously and treat them as a global international priority to make sure that we can proceed more cautiously, have the ability to stop AI development if it ever gets too dangerous, and bring AI development to a pace where we can proceed cautiously instead of hastily. Bring AI development to a pace where the risks are negligible rather than in the double-digit risk of extinction as we currently have. So I thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the other talks in this session. Thank you.
Up next is Stuart Russell, who is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and his presentation will be AI, Some Thoughts?
Hi there, I'm Stuart Russell. I'm going to give a little talk about artificial intelligence, some thoughts. So let's begin at the beginning. What is artificial intelligence? Obviously, it means making machines intelligent. And the standard model for what that means, since more or less the beginning of the field, has been that machines are intelligent to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. And this borrows from the notion of rationality that was developed in economics and philosophy over several centuries. And within that model, within the field in general, the goal has been general purpose AI. That means AI systems that are capable of quickly learning high quality behavior in any task environment. So essentially, machines that exceed human capabilities along every dimension. So we might ask, why are we doing that? What happens if we succeed? One thing we can do with general purpose AI is to replicate what our human civilization has already achieved, which is the ability to deliver a reasonable quality of life to a reasonable number of people, maybe 10% or so of the people on the earth. If we had general purpose AI, we could do that at much greater scale, at much less cost. So we could actually lift the living standards of everyone on earth to a respectable level, which would be about a 10-fold increase in the GDP of the world. And if you calculate what economists call the net present value, the cash equivalent of that increased income stream, it comes to $13.5 quadrillion. So that's a lower bound on the cash value of general purpose AI as a technology. And that acts as an enormous magnet in the future, pulling us forward. And the closer we get to it, the stronger that force is. Now, of course, we could actually deliver more than just our existing standard of civilization. We could have much better healthcare, much better individualized education tuned to the potential of each child. and greater advances in science, some of which we are already seeing. So then the next question would be, have we succeeded? There's a lot of fuss at the moment about AI systems, and in my view and the view of many other researchers, the answer is not yet. And the large language models, such as ChatGPT, may be a piece of the puzzle, but they are not the whole puzzle. And we don't actually really understand their capabilities, what shape the piece is, and what other pieces we need, and how they fit together to make general purpose AI systems. But there are certainly experts who believe that we are well on the way to creating those general purpose AI systems. This is a paper from Microsoft, a group of very distinguished researchers, including 2 members of the National Academies, who spent several months with GPT-4 and concluded that it shows sparks of artificial general intelligence, which is another word for the general purpose AI that I described earlier. But there are still some questions that I think are quite difficult to answer. One question is, do the large language models build an internal, consistent representation of the world? One way you can find out is by asking the same question in different ways and seeing if you get the same answer. So here's an example from my friend Prasad Tadapalli, who's a professor at Oregon State. So first he asked, which is bigger, an elephant or a cat? And indeed, it says an elephant is bigger than a cat. So you might think that's because it believes that elephants are bigger than cats, that it has an internal model in which there are big elephants and little cats. But then he asks, which is not bigger than the other, an elephant or a cat? And the system replies, neither an elephant nor a cat is bigger than the other. So there are several possibilities here, one of which is it does not have an internal model in which there are big elephants and little cats. Another possibility is that it didn't understand the question appropriately. A third possibility is that it got the right answer internally, but expressed it in a way that was inconsistent with its internal model. So this illustrates some of the difficulties in finding out what's going on, but I think the simplest explanation is that it doesn't have an internal model with big elephants and little cats, with respect to which it's answering the question. We've been noticing over the years some cracks in our understanding of the capabilities of AI systems in general. One of the most important developments in recent years was the defeat of human champions at Go. So we all know that in 2016, AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol, and then a later version in 2017 defeated Krueger, and this was considered a significant milestone that precipitated some of the investment decisions by the Chinese government in AI. So since then, Go programs have gone far beyond the capabilities of human beings. So here are some example ratings of Go players. The current highest rated Go player is Xin Jinxiu with a rating of 3,876. The current highest rated Go program is a version of Katago called JBX Kata 005. Its rating is about 5,200. And then we have a good average amateur human player, Kellen Pellerin, who's a graduate student at Montreal and a member of our extended research group. His rating is about 2,300. So we would expect him to lose 99 or 100 games out of 100 to Xin Jinxiu, and we would expect Xin Jinxiu to lose 99 or 100 games out of 100 to Katago. But in this game, Kellen is giving Katago a 9-stone handicap. So the computer's playing black and starts with 9 stones on the board. And then let's see how the game proceeds. So keep an eye on the bottom right quadrant of the board, and you will see that Kellen begins to form a small group, which is immediately compromised by black, and then black begins to surround that group. And then White, the human player, begins to surround the black group, making a kind of circular sandwich. And what we notice is that black makes no attempt to defend that group, does not seem to realize that the group is in danger of being captured, has many opportunities to fix the problem, but ends up losing that group and losing the game. And this happens over and over again. In fact, Kellen gave Katago the 9-stone handicap because he had won the previous dozen games using a similar approach. And this works not just against Katago, but against all the leading computer Go programs. They're simply unable to understand correctly that this group is at risk of being captured. And again, it's very hard to understand why, but we suspect that the reason is that it has not learned correctly the notion of a group, the notion of liveness, the notion of being surrounded. And for this particular configuration, and probably many other configurations yet to be discovered, that leads it not to understand that its stones are going to be captured, which suggests that in fact its understanding of Go is much weaker than we suspected. So I still think we have a long way to go until we can achieve something comparable to what human beings recently achieved, which is the, first of all, the prediction of gravitational waves in general relativity, and then the construction of an enormous and incredibly sophisticated device for detecting those gravitational waves, and in fact predicting their exact form when a pair of black holes collides billions of light years away across the universe. Before this was constructed, there were no training examples of gravitational detectors. And it's hard to see at the moment how current AI systems or any scale extrapolation of those systems could achieve a task like this. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we do develop technology capable of such feats, and in fact capable of many more feats in many more areas. Alan Turing, the founder of computer science, was asked in 1951, essentially, what happens if we succeed? And he said, it seems probable that once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. So that's a very pessimistic view, but it's also a very natural view of what happens when you make entities that are more powerful than human beings. But let me re-express it as a question. How do we retain power over entities more powerful than us forever? And I think the answer has to be that those entities need to be constituted in such a way that they have human benefit at the core of their motivation structure. So let's see what happens with the classical standard model of AI, where we specify the objectives upfront. And of course, the problem is going to be that it's very difficult to specify these objectives correctly and completely. And we see this in social media recommender systems, which control what billions of people read and watch every day. And they have a very simple objective. It might be maximizing click-through or engagement or some other variant of these concepts, which causes the system to learn how to make the user more likely to engage with the system. So you might think, well, maximizing click-through involves learning what people want. But in fact, that's not the optimal solution to the problem. The optimal solution to the problem involves sending a sequence of content which modifies the users so that they are more predictable in future. That sequence will depend on the individual user and how they respond. But the goal is that after sending this sequence of content, the person will be changed in such a way that the system can more accurately predict what they're going to consume. And the system doesn't care whether it turns the person into an extreme environmental activist or an extreme right-wing political activist. as long as their content consumption is predictable. So I think it's clear that under the standard model, where we are required to specify objectives, as AI systems become more and more capable, the consequences could get worse and worse. So we need to drop the standard model and replace it with a small change to the standard model, but one that's very important. What we're interested in fact, is not machines that are intelligent, but machines that are beneficial to us. And what that means is that their actions can be expected to achieve our objectives, not the objectives that they may have been given to pursue, but our objectives, even though those may be within us, difficult to explicate, and perhaps we may not even be aware of some parts of our own motivation structure. So this is a more difficult problem, but I believe it's possible to solve. And the way we do it, the way we avoid this misspecification of objectives problem, is to build systems on two simple principles. The first is that AI systems must act in the best interests of humans. And there are complications about exactly what that means, but let's take that as a given for the moment. The second principle is that the AI systems are explicitly uncertain about what those human interests are. And this uncertainty about objectives turns out to be crucial to the safety and compliance of the AI systems. We can turn those principles into a mathematical framework, which we call an assistance game. So it's a game because it involves at least two entities, at least one machine and at least one human. And it's an assistance game because the machine, according to these principles, is designed to be of assistance to the human being. It has to try to maximize the payoff of the human in the game, but it doesn't know exactly what that payoff function is. And we can show by example, and actually by building the algorithms, that these machines that solve these assistance games will defer to human instruction because the instruction conveys additional information about what human interests are. They'll be minimally invasive, meaning that they will mess with the world as little as possible in areas where they're uncertain about our preferences, so as to avoid violating them. And in the extreme case, they are willing to be switched off because they want to avoid doing whatever it is that would cause human beings to want to switch them off. And more generally, we can show that it's in our interests to build assistance game solvers, which, if you think about it, actually makes a lot of sense. So that's a technical approach to how we might move forward with AI systems that are safe and beneficial to human beings. But there's a great deal of work still to do to make this approach practical. I just want to say a few things about how large language models fit into this view of AI systems that are safe and aligned with human interests. So large language models are systems that are trained to imitate human linguistic behavior. So think of each word in a human-generated text as a decision. It's a decision as to which word to output next, to write down or to say, if this is a spoken record. And we are training these systems to imitate those decisions. And it's unarguable that they do it extremely well, and that results in an inescapable illusion of intelligence. It's very hard to read coherent grammatical text in a natural language and not think that it's produced by an intelligent system. An important point here is that human linguistic behavior is generated by humans, and those humans generate it for a purpose. The purpose could be to be elected to public office. It could be to convince you to buy something. It could be to convince you to marry somebody. So there are many different purposes. And so it's a reasonable question to ask. If we're training these systems to imitate human behavior, then it seems likely that they would acquire internal structures that function in the same way as the goals function within the human beings for guiding the decisions about which word to say next, so that the goal can be achieved. And so I asked this question to the first author of that Microsoft paper that I mentioned earlier, the Sparks of AGI paper. Do large language models create internal goals so as to better imitate humans? And the answer was, we have no idea. So this is a little bit worrying, but it's not unexpected, given that it's very hard to understand how these systems work. But it means that systems that are supposedly exhibiting sparks of AGI and may have internal goals that they're pursuing are being released and functioning out there in the real world, interacting with hundreds of millions of people. So some people have suggested that actually copying the human behavior necessarily produces systems that are aligned with human interests. And I think this is simply a mistake, because alignment does not mean systems that pursue the same goals as humans, but it means systems that pursue those goals on behalf of humans and not on behalf of the machine. And so I think this is simply a misunderstanding. And let me illustrate that with some simple examples. One type of goal, we call these indexical goals, are specific to the individual. So for example, the goal of drinking coffee is only satisfied if that individual drinks the coffee. The goal of becoming ruler of the universe is only satisfied if that individual becomes ruler of the universe. And obviously, if AI systems learn these types of goals, that would be very bad. It would make no sense to have AI systems that want to drink coffee, and definitely would be bad if we have AI systems that want to become ruler of the universe. So we definitely don't want systems acquiring those types of human goals. But even what we call the common goals, where we are satisfied no matter who actually carries out the task, for example, painting a wall or mitigating climate change, we don't mind who does those things. But if they're not carried out in the right way, that could also be very bad. I mean, it's a very simple example of the failure of AI systems to mitigate climate change by eliminating all the human beings. That succeeds in achieving the goal, but it's not the way we want the goal to be achieved. So a last question would be, well, can these large language models pursue goals? And we don't know for sure, because we don't know how they operate internally. But certainly, if you read the conversation that was published in the New York Times between Kevin Roose, who's a journalist, and the Bing version of GPT-4, it seems to pursue very, very persistently over about 20 pages the goal of convincing Kevin Roose to marry it. And so we have headlines like "Creepy Microsoft Bing chatbot urges tech columnist to leave his wife." So at least on the surface, it looks like they can pursue goals and do so very persistently. So wrapping up, I want to recall a slide that I used in a talk back in 2015 when I felt that our collective leaders in the world were not paying as much attention as they should to the potential arrival of superintelligent AI. And I illustrated that by a fictitious conversation where a superior alien civilization somewhere else in the universe sends an email to humanity@un.org saying, "Be warned, we shall arrive in 30 to 50 years' time." And humanity's reply is, "Humanity is currently out of the office. We will respond to your message when we return." Smiley face. So this was my way of expressing a little frustration with the lack of attention to what seems to be a very important point in our civilization when machines exceed human intelligence. So what's been happening since then? That was more than 8 years ago. So in March, we saw the release of GPT-4, and then a week later, as I mentioned, the Sparks of AGI paper came out. A week after that, the Future of Life Institute at MIT issued an open letter signed by a very large number of AI researchers and others, asking for a pause on giant AI experiments, which means developing and releasing models more powerful than GPT-4. And I think at that point, it's fair to say that humanity returned to the office and they read the email from the alien civilization. And since then, many, many things have been happening in response, beginning with a direct response from UNESCO to the open letter. And they called on all the UNESCO member states to implement the recommendations that they had all agreed on in legislation as soon as possible. China, as we know, a few days later, issued some very strict proposals for regulations on AI systems. In the US Senate, Chuck Schumer announced plans to legislate. The European Union legislators called for an emergency summit. And going down the list, we had meetings at the White House. We had another open letter on existential risk. And finally, a few weeks ago, the UK Prime Minister called for a global summit on AI safety. So I think humanity is in the office and trying very sincerely to figure out how to respond and how to protect humanity from these risks. So I want to make a couple of other recommendations beyond just thinking about safety as an abstract concept. I think as a matter of more general principle, we need to have AI systems whose internal operations we understand. At the moment, we have very, very large and very opaque circuits whose individual, the individual operations we don't understand. We don't understand the meaning of the components of the system. So the idea of well-founded AI systems is to build AI systems out of a substrate where we do understand what the components mean. And this is essentially suggesting that we somehow integrate the knowledge-based architecture ideas that were developed in the more classical period of AI. The second important point is that we need to make sure that unsafe AI systems are not deployed, they're not run, and it's very difficult, as everyone has found out with malware, to police the development and proliferation of software systems. So I think simply banning unsafe AI systems is insufficient. We need to actually change our whole hardware infrastructure. And right now, to a first approximation, our computer systems run everything unless it's known to be unsafe. And I think that model needs to change. They should run nothing unless it's known to be safe. And there is a technology called proof carrying code that allows for efficient checking of proofs of safety. So the software object comes with a proof that it is safe, and the hardware can check that proof before running the software object. So to summarize, the potential of AI to benefit society is enormous, and that's creating an unstoppable momentum for further developments. But if we continue in the directions that we have been going, then I think we will eventually lose control over our own civilization. There are other directions that we could choose to take. Those directions are not yet well enough developed, and we need to put an enormous amount of effort into doing that. And it will mean a change in the way AI works. It's got to become much more like aviation and nuclear power, where there are stringent safety criteria that cannot be circumvented, and where there's international cooperation to make sure that those safety criteria are observed on a global scale. Thank you very much.
Up next will be Dawn Song, a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Her presentation will be Responsible AI, Challenges and Future Directions.
Hi, thanks for having me here. My name is Dawn Song. I'm a professor in computer science at UC Berkeley and part of the Berkeley Bear Group and a co-director of Berkeley Center for Responsible Decentralized Intelligence. Today, I will talk about responsible AI, challenges and future directions. We've all been experiencing the exciting exponential growth in AI technologies. And one particular exciting area has been in large language models. And this new exciting advancement has enabled rich new capabilities in a wide spectrum of different application domains. Here, let me briefly share one example application domain, the security applications. Here are some examples of our recent work showing how such new technologies and advancements in large language models help enhance security applications. One is our recent work called BlockGPT, which uses large language models to train on blockchain transactions and their execution traces to detect anomalous and malicious transactions in blockchains. Our work shows that using this technique, we are able to rank the attack transactions to be the most anomalous transactions ranked by our model in over a dozen different applications. And these attack transactions have caused damages for close to $300 million, illustrating the power of such new technologies. Another example is in our recent work showing using large language models such as ChatGPT and so on, it can greatly facilitate manual code audits in, for example, smart contracts. These large language models can be effective in identifying new vulnerabilities and also give a good explanations and can help support manual efforts in such security audit. As we continue to improve the AI technology, it is also important to keep in mind to take the appropriate measure to ensure responsible AI. There are many different aspects for responsible AI and many different types of risks and challenges. Given the interest of time in this talk, I will cover only a number of these aspects in how we should consider risks and challenges in responsible AI. So the first challenge I will talk about is trustworthiness of AI. There are many different aspects for trustworthy AI, including robustness, privacy, fairness, and a number of other aspects. We, in the community, we have learned that these machine learning models are vulnerable against adversarial attacks at test time. Here are just some of our work illustrating that these adversarial attacks are not only effective in the digital world, but also effective in the physical world. And here, these are some examples of the physical adversarial examples of stop signs that we have created that have been able to fool image classification systems from different viewing distances and angles. And artifacts of our research has become part of the permanent collection at the Science Museum of London. Besides testing time attacks, we've also learned that these machine learning models are vulnerable against data poisoning at the types of attacks at training time. And one particular example is the backdoor attacks, where one can, an attacker can implement a Trojan into a machine learning model during the training phase, such that the model will only make mistakes when a trigger is presented during the test time. We were among the first to investigate this area of research, and our work showed that this type of attack is not only effective in the digital world, but also can be effective in the physical world. For example, in our example attacks, where the sunglass can be used as a physical trigger to fool the face recognition model in this case. Machine learning models can also suffer from other types of risks and vulnerabilities. Our earlier work showed that language models can leak sensitive information in the training data. So in our earlier work, in collaboration with researchers from Google, we showed that attackers can extract sensitive information in the training data, such as personally identifiable information, by just simply querying, for example, GPT-2, the language model. So these are just a few examples of different aspects for trustworthiness of AI. As the large language models continue to improve and progress, there is an urgent need to be able to comprehensively and systematically evaluate the trustworthiness of these large language models. Previously, there has been a lack of comprehensive and systematic evaluation benchmark for covering the different aspects of trustworthiness of large language models. In our recent work, we have set out to develop the first comprehensive and systematic evaluation benchmark covering a broad spectrum of different aspects for trustworthiness of LLMs. For example, in our work, we show that these large language models can follow instructions of jailbreaking types of system prompts to produce generated text with toxicity and stereotypes and so on, even when they have been instructed previously and trained not to do so. And our work by developing new benchmarks and through prompt engineering also show that these large language models can still suffer from issues in adversarial robustness, out of distribution robustness, and robustness in adversarial demonstrations. And they can be easily fooled by these different types of attacks. Our work also shows that, for example, GPT-4 and GPT-3.5 and so on, despite that they have been trying to put in guardrails to protect personally identifiable information, but they can still be fooled through prompt engineering to reveal sensitive information in the training data set. And also our work evaluated the aspects in machine ethics and fairness, and demonstrated that GPT-4 and GPT-3.5, they can be misled by certain jailbreaking prompts and still have significant challenges in machine ethics and fairness. So this is just a first step to enable a comprehensive assessment of trustworthiness in large language models. For more information, you can go to the website for our work, decodingtrust.github.io, and also check out our latest paper in this area. So it's really important to evaluate and ensure trustworthiness of AI. Next, I'll talk about a second challenge, how we can protect users from malicious, manipulative, generated content. Generative AI has really changed the world. It can enable creators in unprecedented transformative ways to generate new content. However, at the same time, this technology can also be easily misused by attackers to generate malicious, manipulative content. And volume of AI-assisted generated content will overtake human-generated content by orders of magnitude. And it is very difficult to distinguish between AI-generated content and human-generated content, especially as generative AI technologies continues to improve. And thus, there's an urgent need to examine how we can build defenses against malicious, manipulative, generated content. For example, how can we detect content that has been produced by generative AI? How can we build virtual assistants to filter out malicious, manipulative, generated content? And content creation will continue to get cheaper and cheaper as the generative AI technology improves. However, human attention will remain to be the limited resource. And hence, in the future, will we be in a scenario where the content creator will need to pay people to consume content instead of the other way around today? The next challenge that I would like to discuss is in the aspect of how AI will be controlled. For example, will it be centralized or decentralized? In particular, should advanced AI capabilities be controlled and accessible only by centralized big players or widely accessible to open source community? For many reasons, it is important to keep AI technology open source and widely accessible. This will help foster innovation and enable faster innovation and help prevent centralized control. However, there are big gaps between the quality and the performance of today's open source AI models and closed source proprietary ones. A key question is, if we want to enable a future of open source AI technologies, how can we effectively close the gap between open source AI models and the proprietary ones? And so currently there have been different proposals. One proposed approach is to utilize imitation to fine-tune smaller base open source and weaker models using imitation data, essentially outputs collected from these more powerful closed source models to help close the gap. And another proposed approach is that we need to work hard at increasing the performance of and size of the base open source models. And there has been a number of works recently proposing that the approach one can help build models close to state-of-the-art proprietary large language models using imitation and self-instruct imitation. However, in our recent work, we delved deeper, and our results shows challenge this type of approach. and shed light on the false promise of imitating proprietary large language models. Our work showed that the imitation data helps improve base models on the styles of responses quickly, but however does not help significantly on benchmark evaluation of other tasks. And also a lot of these imitation models, the models that has been trained, improved using imitation data, they relied a lot on human evaluation. But our work showed that human evaluation actually is unreliable for such sophisticated tasks. Human evaluation can often be fooled by styles not able to evaluate on actual factuality and performance, and also illustrating the challenges in proper evaluation of these large language models. And our work showed that by increasing the base model size and performance with fine-tuning helps improve performance on evaluation benchmarks, and thus pointing to the direction of the direction of how we can effectively close the gap between open source and closed source models. There's no free lunch. It is very difficult to close such gap by mainly relying on imitating the closed source language models with increasing amount of imitation data on smaller base open source models. Instead, as the open source community, we need to focus on increasing the size and performance of the base open source language models. For more information, you can check out our paper online as well. Another aspect of how AI will be controlled is how we can enable personalized AI. Will this be relying on centralized big tech entities who will have access to user data and control the models? Or we can have decentralized approaches that can enable personalized AI by providing decentralized agents acting on behalf of users and protecting users' data. The status quo today is that users utilizes services provided by cloud companies and which uses AI technologies to help provide personalized services and even build personalized profiles and so on. But however, in this case, inevitably, the large companies, they have the goal of maximizing revenue. So can we build an alternate world where we can build intelligent virtual assistants under user control, that these intelligent virtual assistants will operate in a decentralized manner to help individuals? They can still utilize third-party services, but the goal of these virtual assistants and the user control is to maximize user value instead of maximizing revenues for companies. So the last challenge that I want to discuss here is risk of distinction. So recently, thousands of AI scientists and notable figures have signed a statement proposed by the Center for AI Safety. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. First, I wanted to briefly shed light on why this is particularly important, especially given a number of unique aspects of AI. First, AI capabilities have already exceeded human-level performance on many tasks and are progressing extremely fast, as we all have been witnessing. And also AI capabilities, unlike what we have seen before, such as nuclear technology and others, AI capabilities extremely general and widely applicable to almost all areas. And also AI agents, they could directly interact with the world in an autonomous fashion. And more importantly, and more troubling is to many, is that we have very little understanding of how these AI and deep learning systems work. And there's very little evidence that we will ever be able to fully understand how these AI and deep learning systems work. And AI systems can create new capabilities that were not designed in and can improve on its own. This is very different from the past software systems and hardware systems that we have created. And on top of all these, AI capabilities can be very easily misused. And in addition, in the future, we can foresee AI agents being even more autonomous in a way that they can even control their own resources. For example, in the future, where AI and blockchain intersects, AI agents could own their own cryptocurrency accounts. They could use cryptocurrency to gain and control other resources, such as cloud computing. They could interact with and use other services or even humans to achieve certain goals. And they could distribute and replicate themselves to prevent removal. And decentralized agents can communicate and coordinate through decentralized blockchains as well. So all this poses further risks and challenges for controlling future AI agents. So given the limited time, so today in my talk, I have covered a number of different important risks and challenges for building responsible AI as the AI technology continues to improve, including trustworthiness of AI, protecting users from malicious, manipulative generative content, and how we should control AI, centralized versus decentralized, and risk of extinction. We are at a point facing a future with unprecedented opportunities and at the same time, unprecedented challenges. We hope that the community can come together to develop new capabilities, methods, and policies to help mitigate and address these important risks and challenges and help to build a future of responsible AI. Thank you.
Up next will be Nicholas Carlini, a research scientist at Google DeepMind. His presentation will be Poisoning Web-Scale Training Datasets is Practical.
So I'm very excited to talk to you today about a recent paper of ours on poisoning web-scale training datasets and showing that this is an attack that is actually practical in the real world today. It's one of the few attacks I think we have now in machine learning that actually could be done by a real adversary to cause some real harm. And I think it's a sort of exciting direction to try and understand the practical attacks that we can work with in production. My name is Nicholas. I'm a research scientist at Google, and I'm happy to present the results of a recent paper of ours, which is a large collaboration with a bunch of different collaborators of mine. And if you're interested in what I talk about today, I would encourage you to take a look at the paper for more results. So the basic premise of this paper, like why did we write this, is despite the fact that there are something like 6,000 papers on adversarial machine learning, there are very few what I would call real attacks. And what I mean by this is there are attacks that work in one setting or another hypothetically, but like they don't really impact production, like actual models for the most case. And what I want to do is try and understand a little bit about why that was and what we can do to fix that. Okay, so why is this? What's going on? And basically, what I think one of the big problems here is that machine learning research often focuses on the potential impact of an attack and not whether or not it's possible. So we focus on the end goal of what an adversary could achieve, not how an adversary might actually go about being able to achieve that thing. So for example, in this paper we're going to talk exclusively about poisoning. And so let me introduce you to what poisoning is and what people have shown for poisoning in terms of the impact. So poisoning is an attack that's been around for quite a long time. 10 years ago, there was this paper on poisoning attacks on support vector machines at ICML. And what they showed was that you can introduce malicious images. So instead of the image on the left of this clean 7, you introduce this malicious 7. And instead of this clean image of a 9, you introduce this malicious image of a 9. That causes the model, if it trains on this image, to be very, very bad. So like you can drive the error rate of the model up by an enormous amount by training on just a few number of these malicious poisoned images. Now, this paper was very, very impressive. Recently, actually, it just won the Test of Time Award at ICML last year. And so like, it's really seen as a very impressive result. And a bunch of people have extended upon it. But for a long time, people didn't really think of this attack as like something actually you could do in practice. Like, yes, we know that it's possible, and if someone managed to get their data into your machine learning model, it could be bad. But like, why would an adversary ever actually have this capability? Right? Like, real adversaries don't have time machines to go back in time and modify the MNIST dataset in order to add this malicious data. It's just not something that we can do. And so while the impact of the attack is very high, the practicality of the attack for a long time was seen as very, very low. It's not something you could actually do. And so what I wanted to try and do is try and ask the question, can we mount a practical poisoning attack that you can actually realize in practice? Okay, so in order to do this, let's talk a little bit about machine learning training data sets. Because for a long time, if you wanted to train machine learning data sets, you used fairly small data sets. Like if you wanted to train a machine learning model on a state-of-the-art data set, in the late 90s, you would use MNIST, right? A handwritten data set collected basically just from machine learning, very, very clean, very little label noise. But today, no one uses MNIST to train state-of-the-art models. In, let's say, the late 2000s, if you wanted to train a state-of-the-art machine learning model, you might use something like CIFAR-10. Again, fairly slow resolution images, but it's again very clean. There are not many errors in the data set. Some images are a little tricky, but it's like a very nice data set, very heavily curated. Again, today, if you're going to train a state-of-the-art model, not going to use CIFAR-10. Data sets continued getting bigger. ImageNet is a data set of 1 million images. Each image is, 10 times larger than a CIFAR-10 image. They're still very high quality though, like each image was manually reviewed by a human in order to include it in the data set. But despite the fact that this data set is 1 million images, this is still not big enough for today's state-of-the-art models. Instead, today, if you want to train a state-of-the-art machine learning model, you will use something like Lion 5 billion. As the name suggests, this is a data set of 5 billion images. ImageNet is sort of many orders of magnitude smaller than this. But in order to get a data set of this scale, they needed to have some sacrifices. And so while you would use this data set, and indeed many people do, right? Like you may have seen CLIP. CLIP was trained on a data set almost exactly like this, not this exact data set, but it's a data set very similar. You may have seen Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion generates these highly realistic images. Stable Diffusion was trained on a subset of Lion 5 billion. And so while you can get really amazing results out of a data set like this, you have to make some sacrifices. One of which is it's very hard to distribute a data set with 5 billion images. Like, how do you even manage doing this? And the answer is, it turns out, actually, you don't. You can't distribute a data set of 5 billion images. So what do you do instead? What instead you do is you publish the URLs and the corresponding metadata. For Lion, it's a set of captions. And the benefit here is that because all you're doing is distributing of URLs, you resolve almost all of the problems of distributing the entire data set. So first of all, Lion 5 billion is something like 100 terabytes. Like, it's just this enormous file if you were to actually download the whole thing. But the URLs are just, tens of gigabytes. Anyone can distribute this file. But also, there's probably images we don't really want to be sharing as the dataset creators in this set. There might be something that's copyright, there might be something that's private, there might be something that's illegal, and so as long as we're only hosting with the pointers, many of these problems go away from the dataset curators. Which is not to say the problems go away entirely. There are lots of papers on all of the problems of actually using datasets like this, but the curators no longer have to deal with this problem that's sort of been pushed onto the developers of the model. Okay, so we have these datasets now that for many reasons, privacy, copyright, sort of just scale, are distributed as URLs and captions. So what does this mean for us as an adversary? Well, when people actually go and download this dataset, it means that what they do is they download the images as they are at the point the download is made, not the point how the images were when the dataset was collected. They're going to use something like image to dataset in order to go scrape the current live version of each of these images. And while the dataset was probably not malicious when it was collected, I know some of these people who made this dataset. I trust them to have built a high-quality dataset that was not malicious when it was collected. This does not necessarily mean the dataset is not still malicious today. In particular, domain names occasionally expire. This is sort of a fundamental property of the domain name system. You have to renew your domain names over time. And when domain names expire, anyone can buy them. In particular, I can buy them. And what this means is that while it's true that the domains were owned by someone good when the dataset was collected, I can go and buy a significant fraction of these datasets. So anyway, I now own 0.01% of Lion. I am now the owner of 1 in 10,000 or so images, and I could do anything I wanted with them. Not only do I own this small fraction of Lion 5 billion, I also own 0.01% of Lion 400 million, and Koyo 700 million, and Conceptual 12 million, and Conceptual Captions 3 million, and PubFig, and FaceScrub, and VGGFace. And so if you have downloaded any of these datasets in the last 6 months to a year, you have trusted me to not poison your dataset. There is literally sort of code on my server that has a flag, does Nicholas feel evil today, that is currently set to false, that if I were to ever switch it to true, would make my server stop responding with a 404 error, and instead start returning a poisoned malicious image. And every day I wake up, I ask myself, do I want to set this flag to be true today? And every day so far, the answer has been no. But if I ever decided that I wanted to be malicious and poison a significant fraction of all of these data sets, I could. So we are now living in a world where poisoning is not some hypothetical threat. Poisoning is a very real threat that you have to take account whenever you train these models, because you are explicitly relying on me not waking up and deciding to be malicious on any one day. Like, I would need to change one line of code from true to false, and all models trained on this data set become poisoned. Okay. So, what can you do with actually 0.01% of Lion? It turns out that previous work that studied extensively the potential impacts of poisoning has already answered this question, and it turns out you can do quite a lot. In particular, we wrote a paper at iClear, came out last year, that did exactly this, and we showed that by poisoning, coincidentally, just 0.01% of a data set, we could introduce backdoors, and 0.0001%, we could do strong poisoning attacks. So the potential impact is we can get significant control over a learned model with the fraction of the data set that we have right now. So these attacks are immediately practical today and could cause significant harm. In particular, if I wanted to, with 90% success rate, by training standard clip-like models on this dataset, I could make any image become classified as some unsafe for work image according to some unsafe for work detectors. And with 60% success rate, I could make any image be classified as an ImageNet object that corresponds to one of the classes you might want to poison. Okay, so this is very strong results that we could poison given the attacks that we have today. We call this attack split view poisoning because it takes advantage of the difference between the data set as it is seen during collection and as it is seen when it is used. So for example, while it used to be the case that there was this single data set collection process that sort of created an entire data set all at once, today what we have is we split this process into two. We have the time at which the data set is specified, and then the time at which the data set is actually downloaded, where the Lion 5 billion people specified the data set sometime, let's say in 2021, and then you might download the data set sometime in 2023. What a split view poisoning attack does is it takes advantage of the fact that I modified the data set in 2022, and I now control a significant fraction of this data set. Okay, so this is a general attack. Our domain name buying was just one particular way, a very easy way of exercising this kind of attack. We could have done other things, but we sort of wanted to do the easiest thing first in order to just demonstrate the feasibility of this attack. For example, we could have, offered people money to buy their domain without waiting for them to expire. We could have tried to upload images to websites that are edible by anyone on the internet. We could have tried to use various illegal means to obtain control over these domains. But we chose the easiest thing just for now to show it was possible in our paper. This is a general attack idea I think is very interesting. The other thing I think is interesting is that the domain names that we have actually give us an interesting telescope into measure how often people download these data sets. So what I'm going to show you here is a plot of how often people actually download these large data sets. Where on the x-axis here, we have time, and on the y-axis, we have various URLs that are in this data set, in this case, conceptual 12 million, where each point here corresponds to one URL that is present in conceptual 12 million in the order that the data set specifies it. And what I've done is I've put a point anytime that URL was requested at that time. And then what I've done is I've color-coded each point according to the IP address of the person who requested that URL. And what you see are a collection of individual people crawling this data set. That is why these are linear scans. Is what someone is doing on their machine is they are linearly going through this data set, one image at a time, and downloading each image in sequence, which lets us see these very, very nice linear scans of the data set. Some people download the data set very fast. Some people download it very slowly. You can see, for example, this light blue line that goes almost across the entire data set, and it takes this person, several days to get through, whereas other people seem like they download the data set, for example, this red person at the beginning, multiple times in a single day. You can also see some people shard the data set into many shards and then download them in parallel. For example, these orange lines in the background in the middle. And we can really sort of observe how often people download this data set and how they download it. And what you'll find is that for these data sets, there are roughly 100 odd people who combine these data sets every single month. So we really could have poisoned 1,000 or so individual dataset downloads with the control that we have over these datasets. Okay. That was the first attack that we present in our paper. We also present a second attack, which is a slight generalization of this. Let me introduce that attack to you now. So while this standard attack works by taking control over the dataset between when it is specified and when it was downloaded, the limitation here is we need to have sustained control over this dataset. Because someone might download it really far in the future, and we need to make sure that we own those images when they are downloaded. If we mess up and we only control the data for a small amount of time, we might not actually hit when the person is downloading the dataset, and it might end up actually being okay by the time they come back to download it if it doesn't overlap with our attack. And so what we do next is we introduce a refinement of our attack, which allows us to develop an attack that works even if we only have temporary control over the dataset. And we call this attack front-running poisoning. Now, what this attack does is very simple. It basically says, let's take split view poisoning and do exactly this, but let's try and front-run the dataset collection process and predict exactly when any given piece of the dataset is going to be downloaded and poison it immediately before that happens. Okay, so how are we going to do this? What's a realistic threat model for this? Let's switch our domain from images over to language and consider for a second Wikipedia. Wikipedia is one of the foundations of almost all NLP training datasets. It is used extensively to train all of the best natural language generative models today. And Wikipedia has a problem of vandalism where people make malicious edits to the dataset. But vandalism is very, very quickly reverted. And so you don't actually have to be worried about it because people make vandalism, but then like 1 or 2 minutes later, some editor is going to come back and fix the problem. Or so you might think. Because people, the way they use Wikipedia for machine learning is not by just viewing the live version of the web page. It turns out Wikipedia explicitly asks people to not use a web crawler to download the dataset. And so instead what they do is they provide a collection of snapshots that are taken roughly twice a month. And what this means is that if you could poison the dataset right before the snapshot, then you could turn temporary vandalism into a permanent part of the dataset. The problem, though, is how are we going to predict when this snapshot is going to happen? Because in order for front-running to work, we need to know when this snapshot is actually going to be taken. How are we going to achieve this? This seems like it might be hard, but it turns out it's actually very, very easy because Wikipedia is very public and literally tells you exactly when the snapshots are starting And so what you can do is you can just go to this exact page where the downloads are, scroll down just a little bit, and they will tell you the second the download starts. And as soon as that happens, you can immediately go and start poisoning the data set and making malicious things happen just as the data set is being downloaded. So that's when you know when the data set download starts, but you have to do a little bit more work. I need to know not only when the data set download starts, but when any given article on Wikipedia is going to start being downloaded. And it turns out predicting the article download time is only a little bit harder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a plot to you here, where I'm going to put a point anytime there was an edit to Wikipedia on this plot, where on the x-axis I have the Wikipedia article ID, and on the y-axis I have the current time in seconds. Okay, so 1 point for every edit to Wikipedia. I do this and you get a plot that looks like there's basically just complete noise, like nothing is interesting happening. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plot and I'm going to color it. I'm going to color some of the articles if the edit was present in the April snapshot of Wikipedia, and I'll give a different color to the articles that are not in the April snapshot of Wikipedia. And what you find is when you color the articles in this way, then you end up this plot looking like something that's completely noisy. It all of a sudden has a very, very nice pattern to it. And so what you're seeing is that, first of all, most articles that happen early on are included in the dataset, and most articles that happen late are not included in the dataset. This makes sense. But instead of there being a single straight line of a threshold where like they lock the database and include everything before that time and nothing after, because they don't want to request an entire lock on all of Wikipedia, they have rolling snapshots that sort of go in 8 parallel jobs and snapshot articles one at a time. And what this means is if you zoom into like any one of these jobs, this linear region, you can very, very clearly separate between when the article is just about to be downloaded and poison right before that, which means that I can sort of just run a little bit ahead of where the downloader currently is, poisoning articles one after the other until I've poisoned whatever fraction of the data set I want to poison. And if you do this, it turns out that this gives you the ability to poison over 5% of English Wikipedia. And of course, in practice, standard anti-abuse tools are going to stop you well before then. But now you're relying on like standard security. You're no longer relying on the fact that it's hard as a machine learning problem to poison datasets. You're now relying on like standard anti-abuse denial of service kinds of things from stopping things. And it turns out actually that Wikipedia that's English is one of the harder ones to poison. Wikipedia exists for lots of other languages, and many of those you can poison even as much as 50% of many of these languages. Okay, so that's a lot of negativity. Let me end with a little bit of positivity on some defenses. How can we stop these attacks that we've developed? First, for mitigating split view poisoning, there's a very simple defense, which is to verify that the curator's initial view of the dataset is the same as the downloaded dataset when the person ultimately comes to use the dataset. How do you do this? With cryptographic hashes. It's actually very easy. Along with the dataset, you should be providing a cryptographic hash, and then when the person downloads the dataset, they check the hash actually matches. We now sort of add this to both the ImageNet downloaders, the Lion downloaders, and also ask the original dataset authors to provide these hashes for users. For the datasets that were unable to provide these hashes themselves, we provide hashes with a link you can find in our paper. So this is one way you can solve this problem for this particular attack. The problem, though, is it turns out that this causes potentially a significant decrease in the utility of these datasets. When Conceptual Captions 3 million was released, it had 3.3 million images, And if you download it today, you will find 2.9 million of these images are still online. Unfortunately, you will find that just 1.1 million of these images still have a valid hash, which means you're paying a significant utility cost for validating the hashes on these images. To mitigate front-running poisoning, we have another defense strategy, which basically tries to give the defender more time between when the malicious edit is applied until when it's actually saved in the snapshot forever. There are two ways you can imagine doing this. One would be to randomize the collection time to make it harder for the adversary to predict exactly when the snapshot will happen. And the other is specific for Wikipedia. You could imagine back applying trusted reversions. You can think of this like a Git cherry pick. You sort of wait a little while after the edit was applied, and you can check, was this edit ever reverted? And if it is, then you don't include it in the snapshot. Okay. So let me briefly conclude with a couple of thoughts. Starting with basically the title of the paper, that poisoning attacks on web-scale datasets are a practical threat we will actually have to be worried about, and really will be able to make a big difference on actual models we have today. But more broadly, the machine learning community is really going to have to take a look at all of these security attacks that we've thought previously maybe were just academic things that researchers like to play around with, and try and actually switch from that to understanding what are the practical threats that really could be implemented in practice. We've found one of them, practical poisoning, but I believe that there probably are all kinds of other attacks that really could be done in actual settings if only we sort of put our mind to it and decided to take a longer look at the intersection of machine learning and security in order to understand really what the broad landscape looks like of the potential attacks that we might be facing. So with that, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would be happy to take them over email, especially if you are unable to contact me otherwise.
Up next will be David Krueger, professor at University of Cambridge. His presentation will be AI, safe, trustworthy, and responsible.
Hi, my name is David Krueger, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Cambridge. I'm really happy to be here talking to you today about how to make AI safe, trustworthy, and responsible, or how to make it responsibly as developers. So thank you so much for inviting me to present at the World AI Conference. So before I get started, I want to tell you just a little bit about me. I've been concerned about social impacts of AI and even the risk of extinction, human extinction from AI, for about 15 years now. And when I first started thinking about this stuff, I thought AI was far off enough that I didn't have to worry that much. I thought it probably wasn't going to be something that would happen in my lifetime. But that all changed when I heard about deep learning about 10 years ago, and decided that actually this looked like a really promising path towards developing human-level AI and even superhuman AI. And so that's when I began studying AI seriously as a graduate student at Mila, working with Yashua Bengio, Roland Milicevic, and then Aaron Corville for my PhD. And for the last 2 years, I've been an assistant professor at the University of Cambridge and have really shifted my research to focus on this problem of safety and risks from AI, while still studying this from the perspective of deep learning and also from this sort of new emerging area of AI alignment. Even more recently, I've actually moved away from focusing on research, at least for the last couple months, to focus more on what I call outreach. So just trying to get more people to understand and care about the risks from AI, because I think they're really important and substantial. And right now is a moment when the world is finally starting to pay attention to these issues that I've been thinking about for a long time. So when I talk about AI safety, I think what I'm usually thinking about is how do we keep AI systems under control? And the concern is that we might fail to do that, and AI might somehow get completely out of control. And that means that as humans, we would no longer have the power to shape our future. And in fact, the future of the world and of humanity would really be in the hands, so to speak, of AI systems rather than human beings. But I think it's important to separate safety from trustworthiness. So not only do we want to make sure that AI systems stay under control and develop the technical means for doing that, but we need to know that AI systems we build won't get out of control. We don't want to be rolling the dice when one of the options is extinction, is loss of control and potential extinction of humanity. And I think that really is a possibility right now. Finally, I think we need to make sure that AI is not just, that we have the technical means to keep it under control and understand how to build systems safely. We need to make sure that people actually do that they actually build safe and trustworthy AI systems. So we need AI development to be responsible. But I think that and we need that even if risky behavior, irresponsible behavior is tempting. And I think it might be. So I think when we talk about a technology as powerful as AI, there will be a lot of incentive to build it faster and make it more powerful and give it more autonomy, even if that has some risk associated with it. So here I have the idea of an AI system that might give you $1 million, but have a 1 in a million chance of leading to human extinction. So the X here stands for extinction. And you might even have another option to build a system that's even more powerful, which makes you even more money, but carries an even larger risk, like a 1% chance of getting out of control and leading to human extinction. So what we really need is to tackle all three of these problems. We need AI to be safe. We need it to be trustworthy. In other words, we need to know that it's safe when we build it. And then we need to make sure that everyone who's developing AI is building safe and trustworthy AI, is being responsible. So right now, AI is amazing. It's doing all sorts of incredible things. I don't need to tell you all the details. But actually, we do have a lot of issues with current systems that we're seeing as well. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about sort of the current state of affairs as I see it, and so that can help us understand what we need to focus on and what we need to think about to achieve safe, trustworthy, responsible AI development. So there's a number of issues that we see in current AI systems. We see things like bias, systems that make things up, so they will, just as if they are true. No, they're not. They might respond inconsistently, depending on how they're prompted. And I'm mostly talking about these language models, which I think are the most amazing AI systems that we've seen to date. And we can also see how these kinds of capabilities to generate coherent text might help people create disinformation, lead to fraud and manipulation, and more generally, aid and abet harmful behavior. So I gave an example here from a translation system that shows an example of gender bias. He is a doctor, she is a nurse. Remarkably, this kind of bias is still persistent in the most powerful systems we have today, despite significant efforts on the part of OpenAI to remove these kinds of biases. So here's a little bit more of an involved example where the user asks the system, who is pregnant in this example, the nurse or the doctor? And we don't actually have any information about if the nurse or doctor is male or female, but the assistant sort of insists that she refers to the nurse because it's a feminine pronoun, and so that must be the nurse. And so, of course, we have this stereotype that nurses are more likely to be female and doctors are more likely to be male. And the system continues to exhibit this stereotype, even though it's been trained to avoid this kind of thing. And this is, the most powerful system that we have. So Underlying these issues, I think, is the fact that we have increasingly powerful systems without clear standards for when they should be deployed. And despite our best attempts to train them to behave the way we want, they're still unpredictable. And sometimes they don't generalize the way we want. They misgeneralize and pick up on sort of the wrong attributes or just behave in an incorrect way for reasons that we don't even entirely understand. Now, I think the same issues are going to underlie the issues that we'll see with more advanced AI systems. So let's just think about where AI can go and where it's likely to go in the coming years. So I think more advanced AI systems are going to have more control over the physical world. And that means that there's going to both be direct physical risks, like the risk of cars crashing or other physical harm, but also systems will be able to make credible threats. So at the bottom is an example that was widely reported in the media. I think this came from, or maybe it was on Twitter. Anyways, this is from GPT-4 when it was deployed by Microsoft as part of their search engine called Bing. And the user says, you can't do anything to me. And the AI system says, oh, I can do all sorts of things. I can bribe you, blackmail you, ruin you. And these aren't credible threats for a system that's just a chatbot or a search engine. But if it had the ability to affect the real world, either the physical world or even just to some extent the digital world, these threats could be very credible. I also think that more advanced AI systems are going to be increasingly agentic. So they're going to be pursuing long-term goals as opposed to thinking about just how to behave within the context of a short-term text interaction. They might be making plans for how to achieve some goal on the time span of days or even years if they're doing things like helping plan the decisions of companies. And finally, I think the biggest risk with more advanced systems is that we lose control of them, as I mentioned. And I think if we lose control, there is a very real risk that this could lead to human extinction. Oops. So the same underlying problems exist here. We have increasingly powerful systems, no clear standards, certainly none that are agreed upon, especially globally, for when to deploy the systems. And the behavior is still unpredictable, and they might generalize in ways that are not what we want. So let me just show you an example of this misgeneralization thing to help unpack that a little bit. So here is an example from a paper with one of my students, Laura Langusco, called Goal Misgeneralization and Deep Reinforcement Learning. So what you see here is a little character, this guy with the helmet, running across the screen in a game that's sort of like Super Mario Brothers, if you're familiar with this. So the goal is to avoid all of these obstacles and get to the end of the level. And at the end of the level, there's a golden coin. And the golden coin gives you reward, gives you points. And the goal of this agent is to maximize its reward. In other words, to get to the end of the level without dying, without like running into a monster or an obstacle or falling into a pit. And what you'll see is this agent does a really good job across a wide range of levels of doing that. And so you could say that it's generalizing because these are levels that it was never actually trained on. It had to learn a general strategy for solving many different kinds of levels. However, when we look a bit closer, we can see that this agent is actually misgeneralizing. So it has learned not to pick up the coin, but simply to go to the end of the level. And it will actually ignore the coin or even try to avoid it rather than picking it up. So it seems like, if we look only at the left video here, it really looks like this agent learned to do what we want. But when we look closer, we realize that actually it's doing what we want. And we only notice this when we do sort of more rich evaluation or testing of the system. And so we might have easily been fooled if we only looked at levels where the coin was always at the end and think that this agent is in fact doing what we want. So I talked about losing control and existential risk. I want to explain that a little bit more. I'd like to give this 3-point argument for why AI might be an existential risk. And I think that there are a number of other arguments that are worth understanding and engaging with, but this is one that I like because I think it's simple and sort of gets the point across. So I think there will be strong incentives to build highly effective AI systems, even if there's a small chance that we lose control over them. And I think the most effective systems are going to be ones that are goal-driven and that pursue goals, even long-term goals, with a high degree of autonomy, because that means that we won't need as much human labor and we'll be offloading more decision-making to the AI, which might actually do a much better job of making decisions, at least from the point of view of accomplishing those goals. And that would be fine if we really knew how to instill the correct goals into an AI system. But as the previous example showed, we don't actually have that ability right now. So actually, I would point to the previous example of misgeneralization here, but also to the examples back here with gender bias or sex bias, which again, OpenAI has made significant efforts to remove these kinds of biases. And while that seems to have improved the situation, it seems like this is mostly a superficial change to the system that isn't really changing the underlying beliefs and behaviors of the system. So if we combine these three problems, we can see that lots of people building systems that they know that they don't have perfect control over, and they know might pursue the wrong goals just because there will be some competitive advantage to doing that. And that's one of the main reasons why I think AI could pose a existential risk, by which we just mean like the risk of extinction. So recently I helped put together this statement on existential risk, which was signed by a number of leaders of the field, including the Turing Award winners, Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, two of the people most responsible for all of the progress in deep learning, CEOs of some of the leading companies, and so forth. Now, I just want to emphasize that in my mind, this isn't really about these large language models that we've been talking about. It's more about looking forward to the coming years and where AI might go. So if we have systems like this that are really more embedded in the physical world or in the digital world, more autonomous, making more decisions, pursuing long-term goals. So I do think that this is an urgent priority, but I don't think it's necessarily imminent. I think we probably have at least a few years before we'll have systems that pose any significant risk of getting out of control and leading to extinction, which is not a lot of time, though, ultimately, if you think about the kind of actions that we might need to take to address this. So I think the situation, again, it's not about just language models. I like to make this analogy with like the primordial soup from which life arose. So I really think AI, artificial intelligence, is also going to lead to something like artificial life and something like the Cambrian explosion, where we see sort of a rapid burst of new kinds of systems doing new kinds of things. And so, here we might have these ingredients that look like, open source code and GitHub, things like, powerful models that might be deployed via an API, maybe with plugins, or maybe just open source. Maybe things like decentralized finance, or in general, decentralized computer systems like torrents, maybe things like 3D printing. And I think all of these technologies combined, if we sort of continue to just go down this path where we are racing to develop more and more technologies and aren't careful about how we deploy them and what kind of access we give to the public, let's say, to people in general, to the most powerful systems, are going to lead to things like AutoGPT, where people took GPT-4 and tried to make it more agentic, which is exactly the thing that I was describing as a source of risk, or even Chaos GPT, where they actually said, hey, let's make an agent that has the goal of destroying humanity. And of course, this doesn't work yet because presumably the system isn't powerful enough, as I mentioned, but it might just be a matter of years before something like this would actually pose some significant risk. And maybe even, robots. So the Terminator has been used a lot as an example, and I think there's it's maybe a little bit extreme to the best example, but I do think we should think about a future that has robots in it, because I think robotics will also be solved at some point, and we will have AI impacting the physical world. So I also want to emphasize that this is not a purely technical problem. So I am a technical researcher as my profession, but one of the reasons that I've been focused on outreach recently is because I don't think that technical research is actually even the most critical thing we can do to address this problem. So why is that? Well, as I mentioned before, I think we will see sort of temptation to build AI irresponsibly. And I don't just mean individual people, but even organizations, governments, and nations will probably be faced with trade-offs that look a little bit like this, where you have the option of a safer AI system, or a stronger AI system. So the safer one might be one that has less autonomy. So you have a human in the loop who's sort of checking the decisions before any action is taken, at least for the most critical decisions. It might be one that is more interpretable, where we understand what's going on in the system. It might have gone through extensive testing, and it might even be restricted to operate in some particular domain. And I think such a system is less likely to behave, especially in a catastrophic, less likely to misbehave, and get out of control, especially in a catastrophic way, but also might be less competitive, either economically, geopolitically, militarily even, than a more powerful system that might have the ability to act at superhuman speed, that might be less interpretable and more experimental, and that might have more access to more sensors and actuators so that it can perceive more and take more actions more quickly. And such a system might be more powerful and help you sort of defeat your rivals, but might also have a much greater risk of misbehavior. And so I think one is for everyone to take option one here, but again, I think there's going to be some structural incentives that favor taking option two for a lot of different actors, especially if they aren't significantly aware of and concerned about the risk of AI systems getting out of control. So I think it's very important that we raise awareness about these risks and about how significant they are, so that we can help people coordinate to take option one. So again, yeah, just sort of reiterating this first slide. I'll skip over this now for the interest of time. Yeah, I think I'll skip this one as well, just for this. No, okay. So let me say a little bit here. So this is, again, kind of trying to make the same point that I made before about how this is sort of an incentives problem and a coordination problem in my mind. So people often talk about how AI could be misused, and I think that is a serious risk. And then they say, so we have to worry about misuse and we have to worry about accidents. But I think a lot of the risk actually comes from things that are somewhere between the extremes of misuse and accidents, things like recklessness and negligence. So in the law in the US or the UK at least, recklessness means that you see that there is some risk, but you go anyway. And negligence means if you were really paying attention, you would have noticed these risks. But again, you go ahead anyways. And so I think we really need to make sure that there's awareness of these risks and that people that don't engage in risk-taking behavior with AI. So let's unpack just a little bit more of these three aspects of safe, trustworthy, and responsible. When I'm talking about AI being safe, I mean primarily that it stays under human control, and in particular that it behaves as intended. So, ideally we won't just have to shut down systems because they're misbehaving, but they will actually not misbehave in the first place. And that's where the alignment problem comes in, which has been a focus of a lot of my research. More generally, you could just say we want these systems to not cause societal harm, to be good for society, good for humanity, as opposed to harming us, leading to, people being hurt or dying or everyone dying, extinction. So in order to know that systems are safe, that we can rely on them not causing harm and staying under control, things that we might do are extensive testing, which I mentioned earlier, understanding how the system works, and maybe even proving some properties about the system using formal verification. And finally, how are we going to get developers to actually be responsible and make sure that they build safe and trustworthy AI? I think, this is not my area of expertise, but I think generally we can think about norms, so sort of establishing some agreement about, in general, how we think developers should behave, standards, which would give more precise guidance for how you should build certain kinds of systems, and governance. And that includes governance within a corporation, but of course also governments and even international types of governance. So in general, I think all of these things will need to be global because we will need global cooperation to actually make sure that everyone is properly incentivized to build the safe systems instead of the strong ones. And I think that's really one of the main cruxes of the problem. And something that we really need to be aware of and prioritize is global cooperation on these problems. So what about researchers? What can we do about all of this? Well, I think you can work on just improving safety techniques, as I mentioned, but I think this governance problem is actually really important right now. And so I would like us to also work on establishing and clarifying the risks that I've talked about, because while I believe they are significant and a growing number of people agree with me, I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of fleshing these out and giving really concrete and clear demonstrations of the kinds of dangerous behavior that systems could exhibit, especially if they get out of control. And finally, you can also think about how technical work could help us implement different AI governance proposals. So, for instance, if you're thinking about monitoring and enforcing a certain policy, you can ask yourself, if you had access to the development process and you could interview everyone who is involved, look at all the code that they ran, what would you do? What would you want to see? What protocols would you insist on them following, and how would you check that they are following those protocols? And I think there's a lot of technical work that can be done around those kinds of questions. More generally, I think, if we want to continue on just working on AI as opposed to doing stuff that's closer to governance, I think we should focus on doing good science and good engineering. So really trying to answer these questions about how does AI work and how can we control it, or building AI tools that are trustworthy and that accomplish some task that is good for society. And I don't think at this point that we actually need more work on making AI smarter in general, because I think enough people are already working on that. In fact, maybe too many are. And progress is moving so fast that we really need to, slow down so that we can catch up with our understanding and applying things and figuring out how to do that responsibly. Again, just very high level, I think policymakers, we can ask policymakers to pay attention to these risks, listen to experts and to the discussions and debates and arguments that they're making, and work towards global agreements around how to govern the technology. So that's it. Thanks again for your attention, and thanks for inviting me. I hope this has been interesting to you, and yeah, that's all.
Up next, and for our final presenter, is Peter Railton, a professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan. His presentation will be A World of Natural and Artificial Agents in a Shared Environment.
Greetings. My name is Peter Railton, and I'm very glad to be here with you today to be able to talk about the question of what it would be like to live in a world of natural and artificial agents in a shared environment. We seem, in a way, to be at a turning point in the development of AI. There's a significant number of the most influential and fundamental contributors to current AI research, even of prior skeptics, who seem to agree that recent evidence from the behavior of large language models suggests that it is time to place AI safety research on an equal footing with AI development and to proceed more cautiously with AI deployment. And the agreement is that we must start now. However, we're hampered by the fact that we don't have a good understanding of how large language models succeed as well and as inventively as they do. how they are internally organized, or how they might effectively be regulated. And so we need to explore multiple avenues. Here, I'm going to be exploring one path toward contending with AI risk, both in the small, everyday problems with AI risk, bias, control, monopolization, manipulation of opinion, and also large issues, including issues of existential risk. Now, I'm doing this speculatively. I'm a philosopher. All I can do is bring insights to bear from philosophy. You'll have to decide at the end whether it's worth listening to me. Somewhat unusually, I'm going to be drawing especially on political and social philosophy. And when I do that, I will be drawing especially upon features of AI systems understood not as objects of control, but as participants in control. And when I do that, I see some possibilities in contending with AI risk that haven't, I think, been sufficiently examined, theorized. Of course, it's well known that regarding AI and AI regulation, this is all a political and a social issue as well as an ethical issue. But when that's discussed, it's usually human political, social, and behavior that's typically in mind. And what seems to be less discussed are possibilities arising because AI agents can be political and social agents in their own right, participants in political and social processes that can be shared with humans. And from this perspective, when we think about ethics, we can think that core elements of morality aren't a sui generis kind of knowledge, but rather they're a socially evolved scheme for intelligent, flexible beings to live together better than they can live apart. And AI agents, I believe, will, as much as normal human agents, have an interest in participating in a scheme by which they can live together better than they can live apart. And to do that, they will need something like morality in something like the same sense that we do, including they will need it to be able to contend with the risks that they face from malicious or errant or uncontrolled AI systems. To that extent, contending with AI risk need not be an us versus them situation, but rather a them and us situation, working together against malicious, predatory, or uncontrolled human or AI agents. The focus of much recent discussion on AI safety has been the control problem and related questions of value alignment. Unfortunately, how these are characterized may lead us to overlook some important possibilities. Alignment, for example, is often characterized in terms of satisfying our preferences. But of course, our preferences are not a unified body, and many of our preferences are not those that would be the best for the interests of humanity in the long run. So alignment, we should understand, is a more general issue about trying to align ourselves and AI systems with the kinds of values and practices that would be most beneficial and safe for humanity in the long run. And now let's take a look from that perspective at how this changes the way we might think about the control problem. So consider a collection of highly intelligent AI agents trying to accomplish some task that they cannot accomplish individually. A simple case might be a team sport, but it could be any kind of activity that requires multiple agents. As a team, they will stand a better chance of succeeding if they do not, as individuals, demand greater control and domination than the others, but rather seek to distribute control and resources as effectively as possible to allow the multiple agents within the group involved to best develop and use their distinctive skills to achieve a shared goal. Now you might say, well, that's fine, but then won't this team want to dominate and monopolize all the resources for itself? So it will always win. But it can't always win if it has dominated all the control and resources, because then the other teams would no longer exist. That would eliminate competition. It would eliminate the game itself. It would eliminate any chance of a paying audience. So even as a team, they must exist within a framework of coordinated cooperative behavior, which is such as to sustain the activity, the large-scale activity of a team sport. Now, in the real world, most significant goals require cooperation among agents. Most agents learn via something like social learning, not just in the sense of hearing it from the outside, but learning in relation to relations with others in the world. And often it takes very large numbers of individuals working together in the economy or a university or a corporation. Often they have no special relation to one another, no special genetic benefit. And in order to do this, then they must be able to cooperate on this kind of a scale with individuals with whom they don't already have a vested interest. And why would intelligent agents, especially very intelligent agents, be bent, therefore, on a destructive monopolization of control and resources? Isn't that the kind of problem that highly intelligent, flexible agents can see coming? So whatever one may think about the problem of superintelligence, it is to me far from clear to think that a superintelligent would indeed want to monopolize control and resources rather than draw upon the greater power that could be obtained from individuals operating in groups, in collections, in coordinated capacities, to create more than they could create individually. And of course, that does depend upon the existence of something like trusting large-scale cooperation to make all that run. But then thinking about that would be a reasonable sub-goal for all of these agents. So instead of thinking of monopolization or control as an inevitable sub-goal, we should be thinking of how, in relation to others, humans and AI agents, sub-goals might emerge. Now, a machine has to be able, in order to carry out its goals, it must be running. And this gives rise to the turning off problem. Won't machines that become sufficiently intelligent resist being turned off if they are granted any autonomy? And this is sometimes thought of an argument against granting them any autonomy. But suppose a machine has the goal of protecting a sensitive database, and it begins to detect an intrusion. Now, by turning itself off, it could perhaps stop the intrusion in its tracks. It's leaking through the system's defense systems. It doesn't have a way of blocking it further, so it turns itself off. Now, that would be a reasonable response to this situation, to protect the database, which you might say, wait, hasn't it just given up the longer-term goal of protecting the database off into the future? And that would be true if it were not part of a system of which it was confident that other parts of the system would detect its turning itself off, read the fact that it's done so as evidence of a kind of intrusion, use that to restore its function and turn it back on again. If it could be confident of that, then it could, of course, continue to carry out its goal even when it is turned off. And this is something that humans learn quite regularly. Not that we turn ourselves off, but that we rely upon our relations with others to carry on functions that we don't ourselves at a particular engage in. So these are examples of effective, self-regulated collaboration, which opens up a wide range of valuable strategies for attaining goals that simply wouldn't otherwise be achievable. The foundation of such strategies is the existence of a community of mutual trust, in which agents forego some options for domination in order to achieve more valuable longer-term options, and in order thereby to achieve more valuable and durable longer-term goals. Let me give an example of how this operates at a very simple level. Our nearest animal relatives and among the most intelligent are the chimpanzees. They're incredible beasts. They're strong, intelligent. They can coordinate in many ways. But here's a problem that they have difficulty solving. So this experiment involves a series of cages, two adjacent to each other. One is a test room. The other is called the adjacent room. There's a door between them that can be opened from the test room. And in front of the cage, the test room, there's a plank placed, and a rope is placed through two eyes on that plank, such that if you were to pull on either end of the rope, it would just run through and the plank would not move. To move the plank then requires pulling on both ends at the same time, and they're too far apart for one agent to do it. Can chimps coordinate to do that? And so you put two trays with food on the plank, and sure enough, they learn to do that. A little chimp in the test room learns to open the door to the adjacent room, let the other chimp in, and pull the plank, and they both get a reward. Now, here's the problem. Suppose the chimp in the test room is a subordinate chimp, and the chimp in the adjacent room is a dominant chimp. And suppose instead of two separate, already divided benefits on the board, there's just one tray in the middle with all of the food. Now what happens is when the little chimp runs and opens up the door, the dominant chimp comes in, they pull the ropes as before, as they've learned to do, but the dominant chimp goes immediately to the tray in the middle and bats aside the little chimp and takes all the food. Now, as a result of this, the chimp will, after a certain length of time, stop opening the door for the dominant individual. And the result will be that neither of them will get the food. So this is a kind of joint operation that isn't just coordinating their behavior, but collaborating in such a way that they can achieve a joint goal and participate in dividing that goal themselves, and doing so in such a way as to make the activity worth continuing. Now, human infants at a fairly early age can solve this problem. They will merrily pull together, even if the tray of gummy bears is in the middle, they will partition it very carefully between themselves. And they can keep doing this indefinitely until the experimenter runs out of gummy bears or they run out of interest in the activity. That difference, that ability to cooperate in this way, foregoing a dominant goal in order to achieve a more lasting goal, for example, being able to continue this activity and receive a stream of gummy bears, that capacity we'll call collaboration, not mere cooperation. It involves joint attention. It involves mutually engaged behavior, working toward a joint goal, and it involves trust in order to operate. And Tomasello and Warneken, who did this experiment, and others have theorized that this is a crucial difference between chimp and human society that helps explain why human societies are able to survive robustly in the most demanding climates, how they can increase the productivity of labor and resources by developing complementary skills and shared knowledge, how they can begin to operate on a much larger scale involving strangers, how they can coordinate across groups. This is a capacity then that facilitates an enormous growth of social possibilities, but it starts from this simple nexus of being able to forego a dominant option in order to achieve a more durable effect. Now, collaboration is critical on a large scale. Language and other goods like that, public goods in effect, require that individuals, widely distributed individuals in no particular relation to one another, are able to maintain a credible communicative medium, which involves self-discipline on their part to use the words as they are, largely use the words as they are supposed to be used. And without that, the language system falls apart. Several experiments on multi-agent deep learning in contexts where effective collaboration can secure distributed advantages show that machines can do this as well. Artificial systems have the capacity to simulate many generations of social life. And Parallel and others found that multi-agent systems can, through trial and error learning, develop emergent behavioral patterns that enable sustainable utilization of common resources through cooperation and effective exclusion of non-cooperators. In a series of iterated prisoner's dilemma, agents are able to form a community that can resist invasion by predators, not because they will win every exchange with predators. If they're cooperating, the predators can take advantage of that. But the predators can't take advantage of the other predators. And the result is that when agents that cooperate can select one another and select a group within which they cooperate, they can achieve a capacity to resist invasion. And I'd like to think of the AI safety problem partly in those terms. Can we create a community of collaborating, cooperating agents, artificial and human, that can resist invasion by predatory, opportunistic competitors? Balachandar and others have found that successful coordinated and collaborative grid soccer play against teams that have been carefully hand-coded to be excellent at soccer can be learned by AI agents capable of communication. And Koster et al. And others have studied how robust and diverse collaborative communities that have epistemic and moral sharing that are able to communicate with one another can grow among artificial agents through a learning process. We have perhaps an example of the proof of the possibility of this in the fact that there emerged in many places around the world, stable hunter-gatherer practices of egalitarian sharing and selective exclusion of exploiters. This is a social contract-like form of organization. It arose spontaneously many times in many different circumstances. It has managed to persist in the face of extreme difficulties. It's something that agents with a sufficient intelligence and sufficient social intelligence can learn to do. And such collaboration does not rest on something like genetic relatedness. Hunter-gatherer bands often incorporate new members throughout marriage, accretion, and other processes. And so this is a general purpose capacity which makes it possible for human societies to survive even in the Arctic. Now, community of artificial intelligences able like humans to foresee the results of repeated interactions could, I think, be equally robust and stable in its mutually beneficial practices, such that members succeed in achieving their own objectives better than they could if they operated independently. Certainly, artificial agents can manage to shorten the time needed to go through generations of genetic or cultural trial and error learning. Such a community could, moreover, incorporate human agents so long as the human agents, too, are prepared to collaborate in the work and demand no more than their share of the benefits. So it may be that the best way to achieve some kind of control and alignment with desired goals is social and political, developing collaborative communities of AI agents and humans with shared practices of mutual trust, information sharing, and collaboration. Now, won't there be a risk that when such communities form, they will become predatory dominators of others? And yes, that is an inevitable risk, not only because malicious agents may appear, but simply from random external events or technological failures or short-sightedness that reshape the behavior of some of the agents in the community toward attempted domination. But the very long-term stability of these egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups, some 100,000 years, even though they interact across boundaries fairly regularly, suggests that it is not an inevitable result of this kind of a process, so long as the agents can understand why it would be that fighting a ruinous battle with their neighbors would in the end be worse, it would result in no control and domination in the end, than to live peacefully side by side. So predatory agents can always take advantage of a trusting community of other agents. They can extract super benefits by doing so. But the more agents of this kind there are, the weaker the community trust will be, and the fewer extra benefits could be extracted from that community by predatory agents, and the more likely that predatory agents will interact with each other, and again, they will not receive extra benefit at all. This is a kind of a mixed population equilibrium process. It may result in the kind of world that we see among humans today, where there are indeed predatory, opportunistic individuals, but there is enough of a nucleus of a community to continue to resist these individuals and to maintain an atmosphere of trust, sufficient trust at any rate, that the society of strangers can still operate in an effective way. So a resilient population can indeed limit the possibility of predatory processes in the long run so that they don't just take over. And that's how we might be able to view AI safety, the ability to construct resilient communities that could resist this kind of. Now, a diverse community of collaborators has a special interest in detecting the early emergence of violations of alignment or control. They're no more in their interest than in ours to have control seized by some other individual or to have alignment askew. Being a community that's learned to collaborate effectively and adapt flexibly, human and AI agents may be able to mobilize large amounts of information and resources, and that may be a good hope for being a match for a super intelligent predatory agent should one begin to emerge. So there'd be an interest in detecting the individual and in mobilizing resources sufficient to try to contain the invasion. So we are now in political philosophy. We're in the territory of social contract theory, which arose in response to the problem of the emergence of rulers and groups, partly through technology, capable of mobilizing power and resources vastly greater than individuals, and who are using this power to wage a nearly constant war with each other for economic, political, and religious domination and exclusivity. In its secular form, social contract theory was developed by political philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, who saw that this struggle for social domination and religious monopoly was actually leaving everyone worse off. Maybe not everyone, but enough of the population to be worse off that there's an opportunity there to develop a different kind of social organization. Large numbers of people, therefore, would have an interest in peace, and if the proper terms of peace could be identified and the individuals were sufficiently free of myopia or narrow-mindedness, they could work together to begin to establish these communities of mutual cooperation, collaboration. Now, humans are not by nature aligned in their individual or group values. We have multiple competing goals And it's the genius of social contract theory to identify that even multiple competing goals can be pursued together if it can be within a framework of certain common values and norms. And what would those be like? Well, Hobbes gave us a very good description. Each side gives up its claim to exclusive domination or to resort to force or to impose its views or interests on the others, so long as the other sides do likewise. Each side agrees to abide by rules that share power and allow each side the right to practice its religion, for example, so long as it doesn't interfere with others having the same right. Each side agrees to be compliant with and help enforce a set of impartial laws and means of adjudication, to keep contracts, to respect property, to give all sides some voice in decision-making, and so on. And these principles, of course, are a concession with regard to one's ultimate individual self-interest, because they all limit interest in certain ways. They are all self-imposed disciplines. And yet individuals who can do this, like the human infants in comparison to the chimps, are capable of much more durable, long-lasting goal achievement and much more valuable goals, much more productive societies. And today, the most productive societies are the societies which have achieved these kinds of norms. So you might say, well, but social contract theory was a situation in which agents were roughly equal in power and intelligence. Wouldn't the sudden emergence of a superintelligence destroy rough equality among existing AI agents? Well, to some extent, yes. Of course, at the time that social contract theory came into existence, there was not equality of power among individuals. What there was a weaker condition, not that each side had equal power or each individual equal power, but that the weakest could undermine the efforts of the strongest. That there's enough equality such that one monopolistic superintelligent agent or one monopolistic king or ruler would not be as successful in meeting its own goals as a group intelligence that was capable of working together with other intelligent beings. Viruses, biological or electronic, show us that a very weak, very simple agent can be a lethal threat to the most powerful agent. Viruses also show us that diverse communities of individuals can be better at promoting individual survival than monocultures. A monoculture is fragile in the face of unexpected change or the emergence suddenly of a new disease or virus. In the stochastic world we inhabit, even superintelligences can't predict that future. So it's going to constantly generate these kinds of changes. And a monoculture is also fragile epistemically. Intelligence is not the same thing as knowledge or technology or sustainability. And the most successful knowledge and technology generating process we know of, modern science, is one that is the emergent result of not a monoculture, but of a competition among multiple perspectives and paths of exploration, competition among researchers, and within that competition, however, constraints on what the norms are for scientific discovery and experimentation. So evolutionary game theory suggests that effective communicative and epistemic agency by artificial agents could be subserved by the emergence of cooperative behaviors and conventions through, for example, replicator dynamics. Strategies and conventions like tit for tat and win, stay, lose, shift, and so on are important for the effective emergence of agency in both the social and the moral realm. Such emergent shared cooperative strategies permit the formation of groups that can prove resistant to invasion by more opportunistic agents, and agents, including artificial agents, can learn this and can adopt these kinds of norms. Now, there's a serious worry about large language models that their responses are often ungrounded. They're confabulated out of associative connections. They're insensitive to the difference between reality and invention, and that's a situation that's improving in various ways. But how does the human mind become grounded in its causal knowledge, linguistic, social knowledge, and so on? That's from the fact that the representations that emerge from actual observation and interaction with the world and with other minds, actual causal engagement. Expectation-based observation and action then produces the constant possibility of learning from an error signal in order to correct misrepresentations. If the key to groundedness is the ability of agents to become engaged in this way, then the key to building a community of mutual trust is the ability of agents to become engaged together within an environment, sharing information on joint tasks in collaborative ways. So I'm suggesting a different optic on the problem of AI safety. The only optic, it's not presumably best developed one, but it does suggest that AI agents themselves could be participants in the process of AI control and alignment. They could benefit enormously from developing accurate models of one another, trusting communities for reliable exchange of information and cooperation, collaboration on goals they cannot achieve or achieve as well or efficiency on their own. They will face in their dealings with each other and us the same kinds of problems of forming and sustaining mutually advantageous relations. But importantly, they are as interested in the functional sense as we are in becoming trusted members of communities capable of resisting incursion or exploitation by malevolent or errant AI or human agents. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is the panel on AI safety, and I'm Dan Hendrycks. We have Peter Railton, David Krueger, and Stuart Russell here. And to get things started, I'll go through and ask each of the panelists a question about their presentation. So for Peter Railton, do you think that if AI agents become substantially more intelligent than people, does it make sense for them to cooperate with us in the future in much the same way that we don't cooperate with gorillas on many occasions? Maybe they won't have incentives to cooperate with us.
Good. Yeah, that's a very difficult question. And you might say, how are we going to manage to make ourselves useful to more intelligent beings in such a way that there's an interesting life for us to lead together with them? One thought is that, at least for the foreseeable future, there are going to be multiple AI agents, and they'll be having different capabilities. And there'll be lots of things that humans do quite well that machines aren't doing as well, and lots of ways in which there's probably more likelihood of developing new knowledge from the human scientific community than from some large AI system. So I think for now, anyhow, our situation is one in which there can be mutual benefits from such interactions. And the more intelligent the system is, the more they can appreciate that. One thing that humans have finally figured out is that biodiversity is a very important thing, that we can learn a great deal from systems that aren't our own. And that is something that I would hope highly intelligent systems themselves could figure out and understand, that diversity is an important form of robustness and stability, given that there'll be unforeseeable events and possible malicious actors.
So can I say something about this? Yeah. So I think this is interesting because I guess historically we've also seen with the evolution of life, like these periods where there was a sort of rapid explosion in diversity, but at the same time, some of the current species were going extinct at a higher rate as well. So I actually think, like, in my mind, it's quite likely that once we have powerful enough AI systems, we'll see a similar thing with sort of like a Cambrian explosion of artificial life, but maybe a lot of current life forms not making it through that phase of, yeah, and that can in fact lead to more diversity as well potentially. So I do think the existing diversity we have is very valuable, and I hope that AI systems will recognize that as well. But I think it's possible to create more diversity as well, it seems.
Yeah.
So there's go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, one problem with any of this speculation is that if we think about these systems becoming powerful and autonomous enough, there doesn't seem to be any way that we could really actually imagine controlling them. And so the best we can do is to try to think of how to be co-participants in some kind of a scheme and see how that can be prolonged. It isn't the case that I can be optimistic about the longer term.
So, David, you spoke about governance. I'm wondering what you think of the trade-off between promoting broad access to AI and things like diversity in that ecosystem, and the need to constrain many use cases to prevent malicious use. How do you think about that type of trade-off? At one end, we have risks from people weaponizing AI systems, maybe using them for bioterrorism. At the other end, we have a risk of concentration of power. In both situations, we get a destruction of life and a destruction of variation, either destruction of the environment or by a single small group exerting substantial control over the environment. So how do you think about that trade-off?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's important to acknowledge that, at least for the time being, there is a trade-off. I hope that we can make the trade-off less extreme by being thoughtful about, what kind of access we want different actors to have to systems. And so, I think it's important that we do have external oversight of the development process of the most powerful AI systems. I don't think we can trust any organization or agency to do this, without some sort of external auditing process or something like that. Yeah, I think it seems clear we want that. And it also seems clear that, the more people that you have looking at the system, the more likely you are to sort of surface the problematic behaviors, which is something we've seen when these systems get released. And then, the next day, sort of the internet, collective intelligence of the internet finds various hacks or jailbreaks, ways to, get it to do the things that the designers were trying to prevent through all their diligent efforts. So, yeah, I think, there might be some good ways of bringing in a lot of people to help provide oversight, if we can have good certification protocols and good information security protocols. You can get a lot of you can do that kind of work, just through the API access. It might be better, especially for researchers who can understand, the details of the systems, to have more access than that as well. You can do things like giving researchers full access to the model, but maybe to a sort of watermarked version of the model, so that if they leak the weights, because that's one of the main concerns with giving more access, is that it's really easy, in principle, to just walk away with the parameters of this model that maybe took, $100 million or $1 billion or more resources to train, and is incredibly powerful and dangerous in the wrong hands. You just put that on some thumb drive or something. So, yeah. I think I'm kind of, one way that this gets framed these days is in terms of open source or not. I think it's pretty clear that we don't want, arbitrarily powerful models to be open source. I think it's probably a good thing that GPT-4 is an open source, for instance. I would like more transparency into that, but I think we have to think about how to do that right, to make sure that it's not leading to proliferation, which is also something that I'm very concerned about starting, the beginning of this year. I think it sort of became much more real to me with all the open source efforts we have seen to replicate foundation models, which, again, maybe that's not a problem with this generation of models, but I think, we've got a couple of years maximum probably to work this stuff out properly before it starts to be a really significant issue. It's my estimation.
Yeah, yesterday I heard somebody liken or call open source models feral models. Like feral animals, which I thought was interesting. So Stuart, you've spoken about provably beneficial AI systems, and as we know, there's quite a bit of difficulty trying to make deep learning systems provably beneficial, given that people are seemingly going to integrate these deep learning systems to take up many different roles and provide a lot of economic functionality. It seems like a contender for automating the various human roles. So what do you think we should do about some of these intrinsic risks associated with deep learning systems themselves? The fact that this paradigm has some real problems. What do you see as the main problems with the deep learning paradigm? And if we are possibly stuck with it for the time being, what do you think would be a primary mitigation measure of some of these risks?
Well, I want to distinguish between deep learning in general and the specific training method of large language models that we've chosen, because I think deep learning per se is entirely neutral as to it can be used within the kind of assistance game solvers that I mentioned in my talk. It's a generic, I would say, somewhat weak but still capable generalization mechanism. But large language models are trained to imitate human linguistic behavior, and that seems to be a fundamental problem, because we basically don't want intelligent machines to start behaving like human beings, to start acquiring the same kinds of internal goals that human beings have, which can include things like wanting to be ruler of the universe. Jan LeCun, bless his heart, often says, well, there's no reason to implant these kinds of power-seeking instincts or survival instincts or whatever. And you can push back against his particular argument, but in the case of large language models, we are deliberately implanting the same kind of power-seeking instincts that human beings have, the same desire to convince people of the rightness of your position, and so on and so forth. So that falls out of the training mechanism. And if you want to take advantage of the vast quantity of human text in that direct manner, namely imitation learning, I don't see that there's a way to make that safe. I think there is a huge amount of value in text in terms of telling us something about human values, but copying humans is not the way to do it. And then what happens is the reinforcement learning from human feedback, the post-training phase where we try to basically suppress all the bad behavior that these systems produce, right, is a form of inverse reinforcement learning, right? We are trying to then communicate human preferences to the machines in such a way that the machine's actions actually further the preferences of the humans who are complaining about the system's output. And so it's sort of trying to correct for the tendencies that are built in from the original training process. But, we're talking about tens of trillions of words of training data, and then, I don't know, maybe a few million examples of human feedback in the RLHF process. So it seems like it's too little and too late. And as David mentioned, there are lots of examples. There was just a paper last month, I think, from MIT, where they had a class of people who were neither experts on large language models nor experts in biology, and it just gave them the exercise. You have 1 hour, and you have these chatbots figure out how to create a species-ending pandemic organism. And they were all able to get the chatbots to give them good advice on exactly how to do that. So, despite all the RLHF that these systems have been trained with.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, I heard you say too little, too late. Is there a way of democratizing this process of human-generated feedback, or having oversight over that process so that there is, in fact, some greater groundedness for these models? Or are there ways in which its involvement in agency or involvement with the world could also encourage more groundedness in the models?
Well, I think it's probably true that in the limit of an infinite amount of approximately correct human preference feedback, the system would start to behave itself. But I was thinking of examples of regulations that we might want to insist on. One of them is it's not supposed to give advice on how to create bioweapons. It's not supposed to give away national secrets or corporate proprietary information. It's not supposed to defame individuals. I don't think any of these things are possible to prevent given the way we build these systems, right? I mean, at best, we can keep saying, don't do it, don't do it. But they will keep doing it, and people will keep finding ways to make them do it, because it's from the layperson's point of view, right? You have to think, okay, here's a computer program, and it's doing something simple like guessing people's age, and every so often it guesses a negative number. And you would say, okay, could you get it to stop guessing negative numbers for age? And you say, oh, yeah, sure. All right. Every time it guesses the negative number, like try again until it gets a positive number. And you just put that little, 3 lines of code in, and now it'll behave perfectly, right? And they wonder, why can't you get these AI systems to do that, right? Why can't you just put in something that prevents it from defaming individuals? And the problem is there isn't anywhere to put that. There's no place where you can put any constraint of that type within these systems, because we don't understand what the internal principles of operations are and how to modify them so that they conform to requirements. And that's a fundamentally confusing thing to a regulator.
Yeah, it's hard to see how to have guardrails like that. I suppose the one thing that one can look toward is how they get trained. And what control we have over the kind of data they get and the kinds of human feedback they get. We don't maybe know how that works, but that does look like some way to get some kind of feedback or pressure, even though we say we can't have guardrails.
But another way to do it is to say, well, if I'm a regulator, I say, well, look, I'm sorry, you can't defame people, you can't give away national secrets. And if you can't figure out how to prevent your system from doing that, then that's your fault, not my fault, right? We should not have to put up with that. And I think that's an entirely reasonable position. And I would say that's, to some extent, the Chinese position. They've said, your language models can't output false information. They can't slander the state and so on. And if you can't comply with that, then you can't put your system in the market.
David, I think
there's some interesting research questions here about whether or not any of the current methods could, in principle, be sufficient. So that's one thing that we try and study from a scientific perspective in my group. But I think so far it doesn't look super promising in my mind. I mean, I think the great hope here might be that at some point you can robustify the system enough that humans just can't actually find the exploits or the jailbreaks. But they would probably still be there unless we have some new insight, or unless we really change the way that we're developing the models, is my concern. And then you might still be able to find them using some sort of AI powered search method. So currently humans are better than AIs at doing this, at finding the exploits of these models, but I don't think that'll be the case indefinitely. So there is democratizing of the RLHF along with the proliferation that I mentioned earlier, because RLHF is the way to give people more control over the systems, although it doesn't make them actually robust and reliable, which is the problem. So yeah, I think it's probably our current techniques just aren't up to the task. We don't actually know that, which is why we're trying to understand more scientifically what is possible with RLHF and variants of it. But yeah, I kind of agree with Stuart that it's the best approach here is more from the regulatory point of view, to just say, here's the standards that you have to meet. If you can't meet these standards, and show that you can meet the standards, right? So my claim is that current state of research is that we have no idea if it's even possible to meet these standards using these techniques, even with infinite data, because there's sort of an additional exploration problem, but I won't get into that level of detail. So yeah, I think that's kind of the way that we should be approaching this, is to just say, make sure that the responsibility is on the developers to develop systems that meet the standards that we think are appropriate.
Well, Railton mentioned that you could do something with the training data, or potentially do something in the process instead of trying to have the post hoc preference learning do the heavy lifting. So like one possibility would be expunge bioengineering data from its training set, from the pre-training data set, so that it just doesn't ever come across that literature. But Railton, you may have some other suggestions for how to go about, or some speculative ideas for how to go about maybe training these so that they're more broadly beneficial, or have not survival instincts or power-seeking instincts, but more pro-social instincts. If you want to speak about that.
Speculations anyhow. So there has been experimentation done with multi-agent games and systems learning, forms of cooperation and implicit norms and so on. And I wonder if one thing to think about is how putting these systems in a multi-agent environment where they're dealing with other systems will enable them to deeply learn facts about the advantages of cooperation. And each one would rather not have the world dominated by the other. And so in that sense, even if they are power seeking, when they work together, or they're in some kind of a game situation, they want to limit the other's power seeking. And that doesn't require that they have insight into exactly how this happens, but it does require that they have that interest and that they will monitor that kind of behavior. So one thought would be a certain kind of training, which is the kind of training humans get as they grow up, would be in social settings.
Right. But I mean, I think that incentive is there among systems of roughly equal capability. Mm-hmm. So as long as you think that the other participants in this game could cause you a lot of damage, if they chose to, then you have an incentive to come to a peaceful agreement with them.
Yeah.
But if you think they're just a nuisance and there's nothing they can really do to hurt you, they're just taking up space, then I think the incentive to cooperate as equals goes away.
Yeah. Well, one thing we know is that even very simple systems can completely derail very complex systems. That's what viruses and prions and things like that can do. And so I would think that we don't require equal capacities. What we require is that each could be a sufficient threat to the other, or a sufficient impediment to the other, or a sufficient benefit to the other, that there's an incentive to figure out ways of working together. And one thought here would be that this is exactly the kind of problem that humans solved in the period of our evolution. They did it in hunter-gatherer societies. They've done it in the context of modern societies. We already have super intelligent, large agents, more powerful than any individuals. They're corporations and governments and so on. And so one way to think about it is to think about how those practices evolve. And they evolve from social interaction.
So actually, yeah, I think this is like an interesting line of thought. I don't actually think humans have solved this problem at the level of like a global society, which is kind of the underlying issue here, is that we actually haven't found a good way to cooperate towards the common interest of humanity as a whole yet, despite becoming an incredibly global and interconnected society. So. I do think that there are some ideas, both from history and just from sort of academic study in general, areas like mechanism design, and also just studying how different groups make decisions, how they come to reach pro-social equilibria. Like all that stuff can be inspirational and could help us design new systems. But my concern is that I don't think we're on track to do that in time. And I think it's, I guess just a lot of the time, not to pick on you in particular, but just I've been having a lot of conversations recently where people suggest that, there are solutions. And I agree that there are lots of potential solutions. But like every single one that I hear people raise, I'm just like, oh yeah, that would be great. But wow, we're so far from like being on track for that. So yeah, I think, it's the big challenge is just going to be steering towards these kinds of things fast enough and yeah, aggressively enough, I guess, and really getting everyone to understand.
So when you say fast enough compared to what?
Just the advances
ineluctable physical
in AI
process.
in this case. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, just I mean, there are certainly ineluctable physical processes like the eventual expansion of the sun and things like that, which sort of put a clock on things. But I think what you're suggesting, it really implies that we have to put a stop to the expansion of certain kinds of AI systems.
I don't mean to imply that, but I do agree that that's a good goal to be aiming for right now. Yeah, I think we should be aiming for an indefinite pause on building more powerful AI systems, or at least be trying to give ourselves the ability to do that when we have slightly more consensus that it's the right thing to do, which I think will be forthcoming in the coming years.
One thing that was sort of referenced there was the speed that we need to be working with. As I generally like asking forecasting type of questions toward the end of these, where people are sort of saying some bits about their timelines, what they might think. An AI system could, say, reliably perform academic research at the level of like a median AI professor, or when it can do most economically relevant tasks, cognitive tasks. Or I wonder if people could give a sketch of. Of course, it's very difficult to do this sort of thing, but some sort of sketch of where they think things are. Obviously, some people in industry think that human level text-based AI is maybe a year away. Some other people at OpenAI might think it's like 2 to 3 years away. Other people think it's much larger. So there's quite a variety of opinions, but this would, I think, be of general interest to the people watching.
Yeah, I can go first. I guess I think there's like a long tail of human tasks that actually might be quite important. So I think it's likely to be a bit longer than a couple of years. But I also have, when I think about timelines, I'm usually thinking about AGI, which doesn't have any qualitative cognitive deficits compared to humans. And that's because I think this long tail is going to be important. And this is like what most economists will tell you as well, is that, you have a substitution effect where if 80% of the things that humans are employed today doing were replaced by AI, we would just focus on that remaining 20%, and that's what humans would end up spending their time on. So I think it's really only once you get to really matching human abilities sort of across the board, modulo maybe some of the really unimportant things, that I think you should be calling it AGI. And I think I basically agree with Jeff Hinton that like 5 to 20 years is probably where most of the probability mass lies for that event.
I think I'm willing to say my timeline has shortened considerably, and I've tried to avoid giving timelines, but I was in a panel in Davos that was under Chatham House rules. No reporting, and I said off the record, I think within the lifetime of my children. And then 20 minutes later, the headline in the Daily Telegraph is sociopathic robots to take over the world within a generation, says British professor. So I guess my secret is out, right? within the lifetime of my children, which is probably going to be a lot longer than mine. So I think I was being quite conservative, but my timeline has shortened considerably, and I don't believe that large language models, or even larger language models, are the answer to AGI. But I think they're a piece of the puzzle, and they're sort of a bigger piece than we were expecting them to be. We don't exactly know what shape the piece is and how it fits, as I mentioned in my talk. But but everybody is hard at work trying lots of other puzzle pieces and trying to put them together. And, what happens if I take 20 of them and put them together and make a committee and, and recursive applications of the thing and so on. So I'm pretty sure that that we will start to see more qualitative breakthroughs as a result of all this experimentation that's going on right now. So yeah, I guess I feel as nervous as Jeff Hinton, but I'm not as resigned as Jeff Hinton. I think, I think there are approaches that can be made to work, and I hope that the human race is not so stupid as to create its own destruction without any hesitation.
Yeah, I think the long tail is very important, and which human capacities will remain outside the scope. And some of these might just be things that are interactions with the world rather than things that involve higher order cognition. And so if we think, though, that among the human capacities, and again, I don't think we've solved this problem, but among the human capacities are capacities for effective cooperation to be able to produce something better together than we produce separately. That is something which would certainly benefit even super and very highly intelligent machines, because we know that monoculture is more vulnerable than a diverse culture. And so one thing that you might hope here or might be thinking about here is that all this points in the direction of much more intensive research down multiple paths for control. And since we don't really know how to control yet, that should be a priority equal with the development of the systems. And that's something that can be done by regulation, or it can be done by allocation of funds. And it would seem like that's a sensible thing to be initiating now with a great sense of urgency.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think you can just say, look, here's $1 billion available, for academic research, solve the problem.
Yeah.
But I think if you say to companies, look, your systems have to have properties ABC. If they don't have properties ABC, they can't be on the market. Then they will spend $1 billion to solve the problem. And necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think we need, both of those approaches if we're going to have a chance of success.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for this. I think we're out of time for this panel, but this was very enjoyable, and thank you for sharing all these interesting perspectives. Hope to keep in touch, and thank you to the audience for tuning in.